Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are. Welcome to the History of Propaganda, Brandeis, Part 5, Industrial Democracy and the Protocol of Peace. Hopefully you can hear me and see me. A couple things about the history of propaganda. We are now in the process of bringing over all of that information that was on our previous site to our home on YouTube. Um, and so I was given a day off today, and I was able to get enough of this organized and straightforward so I can tell this story in a concise, easy to understand way. And so we're going to take full advantage of that time I have. And we're going to put out this part 5. Okay. So my beard looks like it's on fire. So that's good news. The last time I didn't have a beard is right here. So this is an interesting picture that I was just thinking about this morning as I was preparing. And it's worth telling a little bit because in that picture is my former GSP, German short hair pointer, Jesse. And we used to go for hikes every morning. And we'd get to a gate, and she'd be obviously ahead of me and jumping up and down in place, waiting for the gate to be open. As soon as I opened that gate, she'd bust through it, run off into the wilderness. And so I was fortunate enough to get a picture of her there, and she's in midair, and I've crouched down, and I've got half my face on there. So that's the last time I had no beard. Many moons ago now. So anyways, welcome to the History of Propaganda, Brandeis Part 5, Industrial Democracy and the Protocol of Peace. I'm going to try to stay focused. And we're going to get to a share here. So you guys should be looking at Brandeis Part 5, Industrial Democracy. And the Protocol of Peace with Brandeis. Sort of meshing in with the pollution and smoke that's bellowing out of these factory pipes. So caustic, toxic, you know, it's time to face the pollution. So Brandeis Part 5, we're going to get into this, but not right now, because before we get started, we have to actually lay down how socialism enters America, because this is really what we're talking about when we're talking about terms like industrial democracy, utilitarianism, social democracy. This is really how socialism enters America in the 1910s, not FDR's 1930s. So many people think that FDR, many historians will think that, contemporary American history starts with FDR, and all of our problems here of the 20th century started with FDR, but they started a generation prior to that with Woodrow Wilson, his New Freedom campaign, 1912, along with Theodore Roosevelt and his New Nationalism campaign. Now, those are two very important words, are they not? Freedom and nationalism. And so this is really where progressivism lays its brand. First progressive party is the Bull Moose Party of Theodore Roosevelt. It's really, this is where we left the last story on the first American fascists. With the founding of the Progressive Party. So Richard Washburn Child, he's the ambassador to Italy when Mussolini is there, and he's a close personal friend. He's the editor of Mussolini's autobiography, and he and J.P. Morgan, Child and Morgan, Child is a J.P. Morgan representative, and they lend Mussolini 10 million for his march on Rome and his rise to power. And we documented that in the first American fascists. And so we'll get to that now at some point. but there's about 10 articles that I got to get out and pass over to the history of propaganda. So this is just the next in line of the rise of the expert. Thank you to anybody that's been interested in all of this work, especially parts 1 through 4 of this series so far. You can jump ahead if you wish and go to my good friend Andy Rose's The Deep Share podcast on YouTube. If you want to jump ahead, we laid it all out a year and a half ago. But due to complications with my website lately, some of you may know what's going on there. I'm just going to start transferring all of that information over. And that is actually where we are right now, is on that site. So I'm able to get through the admin with my admin code. As an administrator, I'm able to get in and view. So we're going to try to do this as quick as we can and get out of here. All right. So Sidney Webb, he's going to be kind of the key guy here, along with Louis Brandeis. And we're going to get into some dissertations, some very intriguing articles, reports, like this one, Sidney Webb, Utilitarianism, Positivism, and Social Democracy. Okay, so right away, before we could even start, if we don't understand what that title is, or any of those terms, we need to go and look at those. So this is where this prologue begins. Before I can even break down how Brandeis did what he did, we got to understand some terms. So this is the real process of the trivium: grammar, logic, rhetoric. So grammar's first. We got to understand the names, places, people, terms, terminology that we need before we can start to chain reasoning together in the logic stage. Okay. So, in a world of accelerated technology, I've always been contrarian. So I'm going to go the opposite. We're going to take our time, and we're going to allow pregnant pauses. And we're going to allow ourselves to get comfortable with this information. And so I suggest grabbing a cup of coffee or a beer, whatever time of day it is. Sit down, turn your phone off, and I'll do my best to pass this information on so that we all become very aware of how progressivism, or the term "the road to hell is paved with good intentions." You'll see that this is really the theme here. We don't understand, when we're being spoken to in nice ways, how that can exploit us through our vulnerabilities, right? And so this is really what triggered the beginning of the Rise of the Expert series. Was I was wondering why our headlines always have the term expert say in it, or we're always referring to the expert in important aspects of our society. So anyways, back to definition of terms, which the trivium teaches us is the first thing that we do when we start to communicate with another person, is define your terms. And so we can see, as I digress again, in terms like climate change, how the definitions are different between people. And it's in that degree of vulnerability, or that gray area. Because if they control the definitions of your words, they own your culture. These are all famous sayings going back through all of these people that have investigated and watched, and observed and recorded human history. So utilitarianism, if you're familiar with our work, we've gone through this, and we will go through this in part 8 or 9, whatever it is, the Rise of the Expert series. This is Jeremy Bentham. Positivism is Auguste Comte. And social democracy, which we're most interested in here today, this morning, is really brought to us by just a small group of men. And where do they come from? Germany. Just like everything else, our K through 12, our university system, psychiatry, psychology, a lot of our law, It's come from Prussia, from straight out of the Prussian Reformation. So if you understand the history of our education system, comes straight out of there. It's adopted by men like Horace Mann, Edward Everett, both Freemasons. First ever common school here in North America in Massachusetts has a skull or a cross and compass, the Freemasonic symbol above its entrance. So still to this day, you can go there and it's like that. So who coined the term social democracy? Because this is how socialism enters. You can go and look at other terms and we will get into them. But it all kind of goes back to this mid 1850s in Russia, or in Germany, sorry, formation of the German Social Democratic Party. Okay. And I know this is AI here. I understand that. But we go through sources. You're never going to see the history of propaganda or Dwayne Hayes or Diego Garcia ever refer to AI as a primary source. We're on a whole different wavelength here. We're in forensic history. We're going to have artifacts and proofs for everything that we say, or we say that we're speculating. We're responsible with our mind here, and it allows us to stay out of all of the emotion, which gets wearing after a while. So social democracy comes from Ferdinand Lassalle and later Edward Bernstein in shaping this ideology. Early influences, Lassalle. It's all got Marxist roots. This is Marxism. So it's a reformist ideology. And the German Socialist Democratic Party, founded in the late 19th century, was a key player in developing and popularizing the concept of social democracy. This is all accurate, historical, provable, documented forensic history. And we'll get into it. So, and we'll get into these individuals like Edward Bernstein, August Bebel, Wilhelm Liebknecht right now. Or perhaps we can go to the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research website. So we're not listening to AI or exclusively going through Wikipedia pages, although Wikipedia does quite often offer sources. But more and more as we go, I see that those sources lead to 404 error windows. So this is another reason why we're careful with forensic history and why it's great that you're here, because you recognize the importance of forensic history, our ability through the historical method to do the best possible telling of how we got here, right? We may not have it 100% accurate, but we're going to be your best shot at knowing how this all unfolded, to straighten out all of this mess in our minds of how this all happened. How did we get here? Okay. So what is social democracy? From the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research, instructor Barnaby Rain. This is an online course. The left's recent electoral resurgence has given new life to an old term. There's that word new. Okay, this is modern. This is on their website. Using new life to an old term. Social democracy. First coined in the 19th century to designate Marxists as opposed to utopian socialists, the term came gradually to signify a reformist brand of socialism that, rather than seeking to smash capitalism and the state, aimed to use the instruments of liberal democracy to engineer full employment and economic equality. Okay, so that's a mouthful. And right there, we've got to take a couple minutes. Okay, so they're mentioning Marxism. This is all basically Marxism. All of this socialist thought, all of these socialist thinkers are based in Marxism. So it's a battle of the ways and means rather than the ends. The ends are similar to the utopians as they are to the syndicalists who want radical reform, like strikes. This is where strikes come from. Whenever you see a strike, this means that It's radical. This is radical social change happening. And so utopian socialists are Henri Saint-Simon. This is mid 1850s again, the first socialist thought entering, and this has to do with the French Revolution, 1848. And so there is this fight, and we're going to get into it, between the idea of syndicalism, getting labor getting their way through striking and physical war, as opposed to collective bargaining. And who coined that term but Sidney Webb's wife, Beatrice, fellow founding Fabian member. So you can see that it starts to all of a sudden start to go, and you can see that all of these socialist ideas, along with the Fabian idea of ethical socialism, liberal democracy, social democracy, the League for Industrial Democracy, it's all the same milieu. It's all the same groups of people. They all know each other, and they're all working towards that same ends, Marxism in America. Okay, we're going to get into exactly how this happened and who. What institutions were the first? Okay, so they want to use the instruments of liberal democracy to engineer full employment and economic equality. So this is straight out of Brandeis's plan. They go through regulation and legislation. They use the tools of democracy in America rather than radical social change, although Felix Frankfurter's dealing with the miners in Bisbee by deporting them back to Mexico. So there's all kinds of, and the labor wars are going on here. Obviously, the one in which the Rockefellers are involved in, they grabbed the National Guard and they send them out there on the trains and they open fire on all of these miners and their children and wives, and people die. This is going on at this time. 1910, 1914. The Ludlow Massacre, it's called. Go look it up if you aren't familiar, but I would say that most people that are watching this are familiar with the Ludlow Massacre. You understand that people fought hard against this scientific management of all of us. But through the generations, we've kind of lost the importance of all of this. So this is what we're trying to do with the history of propaganda, is make this contemporary news, make these names household names again, because it needs to happen. We need to see that happen if we really want to win. So we see the expanse of welfare states associated to this social democracy. And what it all really is getting people into the factory system, democracy from the shop floor to other manufactories throughout the state, and then the country, nationwide. This is how they were trying to do it, and they used New York and Los Angeles, but New York especially for the labor as a laboratory. Get into the specifics again. So here we will read central figures who shaped the social democratic horizon, from Edward Bernstein and Sidney Webb to Marcel Mauss, and Karl Polanyi. We will engage critics of social democracy from 1930s guild socialists to the New Left. You see social democracy, industrial democracy, all basically the same thing. And it's against US capitalism and imperialism. This is really their enemy. This is who they've targeted to take down America. It makes sense because that is the head of the economy. The economy here, not just monetary meaning either. Economics, we're going to come across a lot of these people are economists, and that's the study of human beings. That's just not just about money. So when we see these research institutes like this Brooklyn Institute for Social Research, which most of the universities in the Association of American Universities are, they're research universities. They are researching you And then that rolls into applied science and how they apply their research. And we are living in Norbert Wiener's giant feedback loop. So we're going to read also from this article, Sidney Webb, Utilitarianism, Positivism, Social Democracy. Like we mentioned, Mark Bevere, University of California, Berkeley. So right away, you're going to know you're going to have some distorted ideologies, some dogma. Here's Mark Bevere, just to show you that in the mainstream, these guys are lauded. So this is how you make your arguments, right? You don't you you just say, hey, Mark Bevere, distinguished professor, said it from Berkeley. And that's a silencer to a lot of people, especially normie mainstreamers. Well, he's a distinguished professor. Oh my goodness. Oh, this is peer reviewed. Wow. Right? You get the system working against itself because they're trying to get you to work against yourself. So, and what's amazing about all of this is that uh, Mark Bevere, I guarantee you, had a dissertation that got his PhD, and it would have been on this history, and it would have been truthful history. A lot of this I find in their dissertations. And this article is from the Journal of Modern History. So this is really their way to communicate, sort of underground, under the radar. I mean, these books, you can get them, sure, but who would want to read them? Everybody else is too busy chasing pleasure and avoiding pain, man, to read the Journal of Modern History, 217 pages in, an article on somebody they never heard of, about three things they don't know anything of. So this is how they communicate with each other, through the journals, because they invented them in this era, the progressive era, this 1880s to 1920s. Basically, all of our journals were created. And like I'd stated many times before in our work, this is something else we need to understand, that propaganda needs two essential pillars: information and an institution. Okay. So they need a place built, preferably out of Beaux-Art architecture with big bricks so nobody can drive their car into it, with big pillars, embracing neoclassic architecture. This is what we see. This is the patterns. And then a way to spread information. So they'll often have periodicals. If you look at the Council on Foreign Relations, which is really one of the first, she's like the mothership, and what Hillary Clinton called the Council on Foreign Relations. Their slogan is ubiquitous, meaning that they're everywhere. Ubique in Latin. Council on Foreign Relations, they also have a journal, Foreign Affairs magazine. And when you read some of those throughout important times in our history, you can see some telling of the future, almost as if they knew what was going to happen. I refer back to 9/11, Foreign Affairs magazine, Sekulau, and the birth of the Project for New American Century, PNAC. I'm sure that's probably familiar. Anyways, so Mark Bevere, we're going to go to source. We're going to figure out who these people are that are writing these things so that we have a picture in our mind. And there, I'm sorry, but that's the picture in your mind when you look at that article as we go through. It's him saying a lot of this, not me. Okay, so we'll start getting into these names. Ferdinand Lassalle, German jurist, philosopher, socialist, and political activist, remembered as an initiator of the German labor movement. He developed the theory of state socialism and was founder of the General German Workers' Association, 1863, precursor to the modern Social Democratic Party of Germany. And so here, I'm just noticing this now. Hegelianism, Hegel. Hegel states that war is progress, peace is stagnation, and the telling of history really is Hegelian through problem, reaction, solution. Frederick Engels, And Marx looks as though he's at odds, but we see that it's Prussia, People's State. Okay, we're just going to quickly go through these guys. His family were Jews in our early life and education section here, originally domiciled in Poland. He was trained as a rabbinical, or as a rabbi. He was trained in the rabbinical. Um, he's in. Anyways, here he is in Leipzig, circa 1840. Okay, so he's a founder of this idea of social democracy, Social Democratic Party coming out of Germany. This is all we really want to prove. Edward Bernstein was a German social democratic politician and socialist theorist, not a social theorist, but a socialist theorist. Social Democratic Party. Bernstein is best known for his reformist challenge to Marxism. So we see a reforming of Marxism, but it's all based out of the idea of class struggle, obviously, because they're all surrounding labor. This is what they're trying to do: instigate, initiate class struggle. During his time in London, his interactions with the reformist Fabian Society and his observations of the stability of late Victorian capitalism led him to question key tenets of orthodox Marxism. So it's Fabianism that's making him question Marxism. And it's really just over to a more ethical brand of socialism, because the Fabians are socialists, as is Karl Marx. They want equality. Everything's under the name of equality. Early life, we already know these things. Edward Bernstein, everybody. Wilhelm Liebknecht, he was the father of socialists Karl Liebknecht and Theodore. So you can see that in much the same way as the Rothschilds or the Baruchs or the other family that grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, that really originated the medical industry, the Flexners, the Warburgs. They all have these sons that branch out into the same socialist ideas, or whatever it is, to continue on the history of whatever their fathers and their grandfathers have started. And Brandeis is exactly the same. Okay, so this guy's patriarch of a lot of it. He participated in the German Revolution of 1848. So there's revolution across Europe, everywhere at this time. 1848 is key time. So together with August Bebel, it's the next guy on our list, founded the Social Democratic Workers' Party. Here's August Bebel. He's the chairman, Social Democratic Party of Germany, died in 1913. One of the principal founders. Okay. So one of the key moments in the introduction of socialism into America is this Rand School of Social Science. So most people would equate Rand with the Rand Corp, which is in Los Angeles. But the Rand School of Social Science is founded in 1905, I believe, and gains prominence as one of the first think tanks in America and one of the first of these research institutes. Okay, so right from the New York University library, so we're not going from Wiki. We see in the abstract, the Rand School of Social Science, 1906 to 1956, a school for workers and socialists, which was associated with the Socialist Party, and after 1936 with the Social Democratic Federation, which just means it's more centralized, most likely. Offered a variety of courses on contemporary topics, traditional subjects, and socialist theory taught by intellectual leaders of the socialist movement, distinguished academicians, and trade union leaders. In 1917, the Rand School purchased a six-story building at 7 East 15th Street, New York, that had an auditorium, a library, classrooms, and office space, which was utilized by several socialist organizations. So you see that this Rand School comes in, establishes itself as a conclave. It's just a regular running business at a non-specific address in New York City. But what they're doing is like a hypodermic needle, infusing socialism from there, and it's going to cast out. We see through, the formation of the intercollegiate socialist society and other secret societies uh, pointed at prepubescent or young adults is how they go about this. They start to change the minds when they're young so that generationally this moves forward, which is right in line with the Fabian idea of incrementalism or, moderation, a more moderate social control or, new world order. This is where we get the boiling frog concept, right? This is what is going on. They're nudging, as Cass Sunstein says in his book, The Nudge Theory. This is what they do. And this goes back to Brandeis and the first Broadway musicals that he was doing, Annie, and they were pushing the boundaries. They were nudging our understanding of things like syphilis and orphans. Right? They're constantly pushing those boundaries to just keep pushing and pushing. And it's incremental, and we're showing that it goes on over centuries here with the progressive era in the more modern terms of this myth of human progress. So it came under attack by the Lusk Committee, created to investigate radical activities in New York. So everybody's heard of the Red Scare, right? Everybody would say, oh yeah, in the 1950s, the Red Scare. Well, that's the second Red Scare. The first Red Scare was 1917. Yeah, we're going to go to Wiki because they tell the story the most accurate. And they got sources. And I've already documented all of this. So anybody out there crying about wiki pages, get over it. We've documented this in all of our work. So first Red Scare, origins. In reaction to subversive and militant leftist actions in the United States, they passed the Espionage Act in 1917. Brandeis is right there. The Sedition Act of 1918 to silence any dissenters like me today. We see Emma Goldman in there. Alexander Berkman, I think that they're husband and wife. Lifelong friend of anarchist Emma Goldman. These are, if you know anything about socialism in America, these are already two key names. Anarchism in the United States. So it's kind of being masked by anarchism. There is anarchist plots to blow up JP Morgan, and there's all kinds of letter bombs going on, much like the Unabomber in the 90s. Okay, so this is really what this is about, what we're explaining all of these guys. Let's see if I can go down. Let's see. Find this. We're going to run into men like Hillquit, Eugene Debs. We see the American Federation of Labor involved. That's Samuel Gompers. We're going to talk about him as well. Palmer raids. We're talking about the exact same era, the labor wars that I was mentioning earlier. But much like in the 50s, you can see here the Red Scare led to Western popularization of the protocols of the Elders of Zion. But much like in the 50s, with the Red Scare that most people know about, the real enemies, those that were most influential, got away. and they kind of propped up a sacrificial lamb. So, anyways, where was I? Rand School for Social Science. This is the introduction of socialism in America. People, if you've never heard of it, this is it. So they run under scrutiny, but they aren't shut down because they're working well into the 50s, into the second Red Scare. So the first Red Scare did little. So here we have board members of the ASS, okay? The American Socialist Society. They are a bunch of asses. There's no doubt. This reminds me of the American Sociological Society, changing their name a little earlier in history than this, in the 1880s or something. They changed their name because they're like, hey, our acronym is ASS, guys. So they changed it to the American Sociological Institute or something. I don't know. So board members of the ASS included Charles Beard, Morris Hillquit, Harry Laidler, Algernon Lee, John Spargo, Secretary W.J. Gent. Over the next 50 years, a variety of Rand School courses on many contemporary topics, traditional subjects, and socialist theory were taught by intellectual leaders of the socialist movement, distinguished academicians, and trade union leaders. So that actually, the first introduction of it wasn't necessarily AI. It was a direct quote right from here. So you can see Camp Tamament, this outdoor camp environment in which they spread socialist theory. This is the same with the German, whatever they were called in Eastern United States in the 30s, 40s. Same with the Christian movement, the first Christians to come here and preside in the Pacific Palisades. It's been a while since I said that term, and it's a tricky native Indian term. I can't remember. It starts with a W. Hillary Clinton lives in a place that's the same name. But anyways, these outdoor camps where trade unions and the working class can get together and talk about socialism. This is really how it started, along with this headquarters that they had in New York. It outgrown their classrooms. They bought this building at 7 East 15th Street we talk about. It's called the People's House. And so when we talk about the Frankfurt School of the 30s, men like Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, leaders of this Frankfurt School, Herbert Marcuse, they all come over to America fleeing Hitler. And where do they land but Colombia? It's a strange occurrence. Should be, should make you wonder. But this Frankfurt School is a bunch of Marxists, known, admitted, historically verified Marxists. And they came over to America, and this is another moment of the hypodermic needle into the intellectual, educational population. And so that today is called the New School. It's just simply the New School. There's that word new again. And it's straight out of Columbia, still to this day. And they've completely expanded. When you look, it's massive. And 100 years later, all these ideas that were first hatched then have really sort of permeated into the fabric of our culture, so much so that it really is our culture. The things that we kind of fight for as our culture are a front, cardboard cutout. We got to get back to our original culture, whatever that is. So some of the more notable instructors for these courses were Charles Beard, Franz Boas, Mark Connolly, Stephen Vincent Benet, Bertrand Russell, and Auguste Claessens. And so Newark School of Social Science. Anytime you see these words, social science, we're gonna get into all of these in part 6, Brandeis, the science of law. and how he overthrew law through something called sociological jurisprudence and his what is still called today and lauded the Brandeis brief. This is what taught the NAACP and the ACLU how to be political activists. This is really at the basis of BLM today and Antifa and all these fake uprisings. They want they're rising to identify where a society has a shortcoming, how they're victimized, and then they want redress. This is the term that Brandeis used, redress. Demand redress. You want something for your suffering. Okay, this is the idea behind the Brandeis brief. And it really replaces arguments of law with arguments of social science, facts, stats, data, all manipulable and all subjective. So now we've gone from an objective sort of observation of a crime happening to a subjective one, where now the judge is really just a observer himself, a member of the jury or even of the crowd, the spectators. And this is another key aspect to the rise of the expert, the scientific expert. We're all sort of allowing this entering wedge, which is what Walter Lippmann called it, to get between us and the source of information, the source of spirit, the source of freedom, the source of labor. And they call it new, and they put it in there, and it works like splitting a log. Entering wedge. Walter Lippmann, father of modern journalism. You can go to the History of Propaganda. I've got detailed work on him, but he is a close personal friend of Louis Brandeis. They're all hanging out at the House of Truth. If you don't know what the House of Truth is, that is also on our wall at the History of Propaganda. I encourage you to go and look at that, because this is where it all starts. And I would imagine a lot of these socialists were at some point darkening the door of the House of Truth, walking the steps and going to meetings, because this is a political salon. You know, this idea of gathering a bunch of influential thinkers and artists and creatives, intelligent creatives, into a room, private house where they can conspire. This comes straight out of the French Revolution. And so what is Greenwich Village really but a giant political salon now of socialist ideas? We see that this is where these guys really get their start, is in Greenwich Village, including Walter Lippmann. This is why he is under attack for his early socialist leanings, right? But he remains a socialist his entire life. It's kind of explained away as he was just a young boy and didn't know any better, but he was a socialist in his beliefs till the day he died. And he was an insider. He was a member of all kinds of clubs. He was educated at the Sachs School for Boys. Yeah, that's Sachs, Goldman Sachs. And he's a German Jew growing up in a gilded Jewish ghetto. This is what his biographer, Ronald Steele, says. This is one of the books. I think I've shown this before, Walter Lippmann and the American Century. Ronald Steele is the official Lippmann biographer. There he is. So he says Lippmann grew up in a gilded Jewish ghetto. Which is code probably for growing up, rich, high class, because they go to Europe every year for like 12 years in a row or something when he's a boy. And it may seem like I'm digressing here, but we're going to get into Lippmann because he's a key guy in the establishing of socialism in America. Okay, so we're just referring to credible sites. Credible. When I say credible, I'm not necessarily believing that these guys are credible at all, but to the mainstream and the normie, these still are. And in the specific use of these stories, I do believe by connecting the dots through these works, we get to a better knowledge of how we got there. If you understand what I mean, these dissertations, the doctoral reports that these guys do to get their PhDs, a lot of it's been verified and documented as absolute truth. It's not like they are retelling the truth. We've already shown how they do that through the textbooks, through the curriculum. Yet in these higher stages of learning, the higher echelons of Ivy League, they're telling the truth to each other. And so you can dig up dissertations, or you can go to places like this or Yale papers, which we're going to get into. You can see that it's just a matter of fact. Schopenhauer said there's three stages of the truth. First, it's ridiculed, then it's violently opposed, and then it's admitted as self-evident. So once you get through these stages of understanding history, you see that it's all just admitted by the people that have done it too, or those that have followed in the footsteps of those people, purporting the same dogmas, running the same institutions, editing the same periodicals. So Charles Beard has mentioned he is a founding progressive. If you look into the guy, he's considered a progressive. He's a history professor at Columbia, and his work included a radical reevaluation of the founding fathers of the United States. So here we are. He's the author of the New History, along with another cohort we're going to get into. So one thing I skipped over on social democracy is, in essence, social democracy is using democratic processes and institutions to achieve equitable society. I think I did mention that through the Fabians, that's how they do it. But they identified, a democratic environment, or going through legislation, regulation, and using the tools of a democratic society or a democratic government to get what they want, rather than be radical and putting out strikes or fighting the government physically. They were going to incrementally change it through legislation. You'll see that's the belief of all of these guys. This is exactly what makes you a progressive. It's that you want the government to be more centralized and in control. You want a welfare state that takes care of the poor and needy. You believe in class conflict. You see there. These guys are based in Marxism. And Beard and his cohort, James Harvey Robinson, who we're going to get into here too, actually resigned from Columbia under great controversy. And I think that this is why, because they were socialists trying to infuse socialism into American intellectual thought. So Richard Hofstadter here is another author. I've got some of his books here on my shelf. And what does Richard Hofstadter talk about? But the progressive era, the progressive movement of 1900 and 1915. It's like the Reservoir Dogs, the real Reservoir Dogs. So Charles Beard, Columbia University professor of history, as a radical reevaluation of our founding fathers and reinterpretation of early American history. So you want to talk about how historians create a new history. The history is told by the victors. Here is how they attempted to do that. Columbia University joined the faculty as a lecturer. An economic interpretation of the Constitution of the United States. So it's not just monetary, remember. Resigned from Columbia University October 8th, 1917, charging that the university is really under the control of a small and active group of trustees who have no standing in the world of education. We're reactionary and visionless in politics, narrow and medieval in religion. I am convinced that while I remain in the pay of the trustees of Columbia University, I cannot do effectively my part in sustaining public opinion in support of the just war on the German Empire. So he's opposing the war, and a lot of these people do. This is how they create the League of Nations. This is how they infuse internationalism into society, by pointing out um, the ugliness of war or material arms blowing each other up. So this is why they say, well, we can offer you this idea of internationalism, of international diplomacy, of containment, of collective security through the League of Nations, something that Immanuel Kant talked about. So Beard and Robinson resigned from Columbia together in 1918. And what do they go do and found? The New School for Social Research. Okay, 1919. So this is the founding of the New School for Social Research. And we'll carry on down this path here for a sec, just to make the connection. Previously known as the University in Exile, which is direct uh, uh, it's a direct affiliation with the 1930s Frankfurt School move that we just talked about. New School for Social Research was founded in 1919 by a group of progressive intellectuals, mostly from Columbia University and the New Republic. Okay, so the New Republic, who founds that? Some of you may already know this if you've looked through my work, but Louis Brandeis, Walter Lippmann, Felix Frankfurter, Walter Weil, Herbert Crowley, who wrote the Progressive Manifesto. Okay, same milieu. All of these people living at the House of Truth or honored guests there. This political salon from which a redefinition of liberalism comes. Okay, this is very important. Look at who else is here. Thorsten Veblen, one of the early sociologists, but almost like a structuralist, experimental science going on here when you start talking about Thorstein Veblen and the trail that is created by Wilhelm Wundt out of Leipzig and the creation of experimental psychology, and then how that all expanded into the university system. All these PhDs go over, get the first PhDs ever given to foreigners, because the PhD system comes from Prussia. Well, the Americans, just like the K through 12, Edward Everett and Horace Mann, who founded the K through 12 education system, go over there, get their PhDs, adopt the Prussian idea of education, bring it over to America. So too with the idea of psychology, human psychology or experimental psychology. William James is key in this too, who's directly connected to Walter Lippmann's time at Harvard. We see this extension coming out. So another guy here mentioned Harold Lasky. Well, he's living at the House of Truth too. Was he but a Marxist professor who spent time at Harvard too, but he's London School of Economics. What is that? But that's founded by the Fabian Society. London School of Economics, also where Mick Jagger went to school. Just to give you an idea how deep this goes. Alvin Saunders Johnson, another key guy. This is really from out of the same milieu comes the inquiry, the founding of US foreign policy, the predecessors to the Council on Foreign Relations. The idea of killing people from a good, safe distance, not having wars on your own property, subjugating backwards races and exploiting their natural resources. And then those immigrants flee and come here and create total chaos. Yeah, it's all starting here. The New School for Social Science, which is now just the New School, was the university in exile when they all came over fleeing Hitler a generation later after it was founded here in 1919. You can see, here we are. They are telling you the same thing. There are sources, and I've already gone through this. I've provided plenty of provenance. We've gone beyond the level of belief to knowledge of how this happened. Okay, New School for Social Research, 1905, founded in New York as a research institute to start to research capitalist Western society and ways to infiltrate. This is where critical theory comes from a generation later, from Adorno and Horkheimer. They're just critical of Western society. They pick it apart while they're also writing screenplays for Hollywood film noir and horror genre. And we can get into that with how Huxley hijacked Hollywood, the Exilitrator, Hidden in the Shadow of the Sun. There's 3 deep articles. We go into it. We'll get into those. I promise you, I'm going to get all these out. I don't know when, but I'll do this one today, and we'll see if we can get out another one. But I'll put them on premieres. We'll put them a week apart, maybe, because you're going to need a week just to sort of recover from a lot of this. Because you're going to start to learn true American history. This right here is the real truth movement. Totally hijacked by COVID. David Icke. So anyways, Morris Hillquit. Morris Hillquit is not his real name, by the way. He was born Moish Hilkowitz. If you go to his early year section, German-speaking ethnic Jewish factory owners. So they're involved in labor. But this guy, if you ever looked into socialism in America, he's a key figure, along with who you see here, Eugene V. Debs. So Hillquit, a founder and leader of the Socialist Party of America. This is the first socialist party ever in the United States, because the idea of socialism is only at this point 60 years old. A lot of these things you're going to discover are a lot more modern than you think, too. Things like peer review, socialism. So he's running on an anti-war platform. So in my Future Perfect Part 1 and 2 articles, we go deep into how Aldous Huxley and this Bertrand Russell, Virginia Woolf and her father, all of these anti-war protesters, but non-interventionalists. Okay, they don't want to go and overseas and intervene in other people's problems. This is what they labeled themselves: non-interventionalists or pacifists. This is what they also called themselves. They were pacifists when it came to the idea of foreign wars. They just wanted to, this is what they said anyways, officially, publicly. They didn't want anything to do with foreign wars. So out of this whole idea comes the League of Nations, and it's totally Hegelian: problem, reaction, solution, industrial revolution and the war. Out of this comes the infusion of socialism into America. Because war is progress, peace is stagnation. This is why we still have world war going on today, really largely uninterrupted since. If you think about it. What's NATO doing? These are also the creators of NATO, by the way. And where's war going on? Same place, Central Europe. What used to be called the Pale of Settlement, Polish-Lithuanian corridor. Nothing's changed in a long time. So I'm going to try to remember some key points for these guys. He's involved with a Yiddish newspaper. Here he is when he's younger. Strong supporter of unity with the Chicago-based Social Democratic Party, Eugene Debs. They buried their differences and came together to form the Socialist Party of America. So Hillquit's key. He's one of the key founders. So battle with syndicalist left wing. Here's what I was referring to earlier. So after the campaign, Hillquit turned his attention to inner party affairs, which brought him into conflict with the SPA's syndicalist left wing. And what is the difference? What are they quibbling over? Ways and means to get to the ends, yep. But this goes back to this idea of changing things radically or reforming through legislation. So you can see that they all have differing sort of ideas on how they want to best get there. So there's probably some care still left in these people at that point. But, you know, Bohemian Grove was around. They were still cremating care, and what they really called it then, and then you can look at it in their literature, is disinterestedness. We called it apathy in the 90s, 80s, and 90s. Now we just call it blissful ignorance. And within that blissful ignorance of trusting the expert, you've left yourself open. You're vulnerable to a degree of exploitation directly proportionate to how much you trust that authority. So if you're in total 100% trust of the authority that's directing your life, there's a 100% chance that you're being exploited through that vulnerability. In today's day and age, I guarantee you. So this is the problem with blissful ignorance. This is what my family's all told me. This is what a lot of the normies tell me. I'd rather listen to an expert than some basement dwelling internet surfer. But we always refer back to the source material, and we see that we're going from a lot of the same material, and it's all reputable. Just people are confused by the mainstream media. James Harvey Robinson is the cohort of the previously mentioned Charles A. Beard. Charles Austin Beard, shown here, was an American scholar of history who, with Charles Austin Beard, founded New History. He just founded New History. And that's legit, because you'll see that all of these men make profound changes to the direction of Western society. And, Huxley and Aldous and Julian Huxley talked about infiltrating all of the institutions of America at the same time. So there's like 7 or 8 of them that they identified: the intellectual, the military, the social, the economic, right? They go through all of these. They systematically infiltrate through this Association of American Universities. Really, Harvard, Yale, William and Mary College, and the Ivy League in general is kind of the tip of the spear when it comes to the scientific expert and how we are influenced in our society, not by those that we vote for, but by those with Master of Arts degrees or PhDs, Bachelors of Science. So Wharton, same school I think Trump went to, the founders of the New School for Social Research, University in Exile. I've got some incredible home video footage of the University in Exile while they were at one of these characters' homes that we'll get into. It's just amazing. They're shooting bows and arrows. They're playing cricket. It's quite hysterical. So, New History. Through his writings and lectures in which he stressed the new history, the social, scientific, and intellectual progress of humanity rather than merely political happenings, Robinson exerted an important influence on the study and teaching of history, an editor 1892 to 1895 of the Annals of the American Academy of Political and Social Science. This is one thing you're going to find, is that they all have PhDs or Master of Arts degrees, but they're also editors of things like the American Historical Review or the Harvard Law Review or the American Association of fill in the blank. This is part of their prerequisite education. If they're going to be members of the managerial class, they have to first graduate top of class in general, and then also have now in their experience coming out of university an editorship, being able to then propagate this information. Okay, we talked about the 2 pillars of propaganda being an institution and information. This is why. So the book and the New History movement itself was not without staunch critics. Classical scholar and foe to progressive treatises of history, Paul Shorey, in a review of the book, declared, "I have no sympathy with academic superciliousness toward popular fiction, popular drama, or the popularization of the real sciences so far as this is possible." And if Mr. Robinson had exercised his undoubted gifts of vivacity and apparent lucidity in these fields, I would have been the last to cavil at the crudities and superficialities inseparable from all such endeavor. But he makes his appeal as a critical thinker and a lifelong student of history. It is therefore fair to remind him of what, in spite of the complacence of American reviewing, he probably knows that in the judgment of those whom he once would have regarded as his peers, he is fast forfeiting his claim to the title of historian by his reckless disregard of the warning, historia scribitur ad narrandum non ad probatum. History is written in the narrative, not proven. I have no idea why I read that. Sorry to waste your time. Okay, so the key here is new history. We're going to move on. But James Harvey Robinson, Charles Beard, key friend of this guy, Canadian Quaker James T. Shotwell. Many of you, if you've gone through my inquiry series, will be familiar with James T. Shotwell. He's a member of the inquiry, the predecessor to the Council on Foreign Relations. He's the founder of the International Labor Organization. You can go into at the Paris Peace Conference, his book about the 1919 Paris Peace Conference, and it goes into detail as who was involved in the creation of the International Labor Organization. And it had to have been key. He's the guy in his book. He talks specifically about the New World Order and how his International Labor Organization had to fit in to that. This is, and he also says that the largest obstacle to getting it done was the U.S. Constitution. All the other countries fell into place, this International Labor Organization. But it was the countries with a constitution of freedom based on, freedom of speech, thought, and assembly, most specifically America. So if you read at the Paris Peace Conference, James T. Shotwell, I've gone deep into him, offered all the sources, just go through our work at the History of Propaganda. I'll leave little doubt that much like in the formation of many things that were anti-constitutional, right? It was the American Constitution that was the key obstacle. They used that terminology. So he obtained a BA, Shotwell did, from the University of Toronto. That's a Bachelor of Arts. So that's the 7 liberal arts. He's a master of creating images. When you are well-versed in the liberal arts, you know grammar, logic, rhetoric. You have a deeper understanding of how this world works and the environment in which you live. This is why they took it out of our general education, because it made us too smart. Taught us about logical fallacy, and so we would be able to identify when we were lied to. So of course we're going to get that taken out of the curriculum. If we're going to lie to them, we don't want them to be able to easily identify when they're being lied to, do we? No. And chain of reasoning. This teaches people how to put 2 and 2 together. Well, we're going to remove that too. Yes, of course we would. Yep. See, this infusion then in that empty space of the scientific expert and the new history, the new freedom, the new nationalism, the new democracy, the new spirit, the new republic, the new competition. This is all same year, 1913, and spills into 1914. All of these men wrote books, as did Woodrow Wilson and Theodore Roosevelt. New freedom, new nationalism. Keyword is new. The implying forward motion, the rat race, the hamster wheel, Monday to Friday, progressivism, the idea of progress and utilitarianism, the idea that you got to be of good utility. You got to produce for others and the greater good. This is direct Jeremy Bentham. Hedonic calculus, the avoidance of pleasure, or the chasing of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. Hedonic calculus, we're going to get into that in the next article on the rise of the expert, because they had to create a society that was of good utility, of course, working in the factories, and consumption minded and empty, really, as human beings. This is why waking up is really growing up. It's really about taking responsibility for your own acts and your own life, making sure that you're not initiating or enabling yourself. This is why we started the farm. So Columbia, Shotwell became a lecturer in history in 1900 and an instructor in 1903 and adjunct professor. Adjunct professor just means he's getting paid. What do they call them in war? These paid military guys. This is what he is, but education and intellectual property, not bullets and bombs. Can't remember the name of them. So Shotwell became director of research at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which is like a block or two away from the White House, where Columbia's president, Nicholas Murray Butler, who was also president. Social Science Research Council, he's the chairman, advisory committee, international relations. Of course he is, because he's just the primary founder of the International Labor Organization, the ILO. He's working in 1917. He's the guy that named the inquiry. He's the guy responsible with gathering all these social and political scientists. He's appointed by Brandeis because Wilson hands this report to Brandeis directly. It's Colonel House and Brandeis that then elect Shotwell to sort of coordinate and get these people to, I mean, it says it right here. They say established by Woodrow Wilson, but this is Brandeis behind all of this. This is part of the New Freedom Campaign. So if you're unfamiliar with these guys, this is a picture at Paris Peace Conference. Isaiah Bowman, Edward Mandell House. You want to talk about the rewriting of history? Here's your guy. Charles Haskins, 1917. These guys redrew the maps of Central Europe. This is the specific group. There was 150 involved in New York. They whittled that down to 23 or 25. And these are the key guys. Here's James T. Shotwell. All of these guys, as we've gone through, Master of Arts degrees, a lot of Phi Beta Kappa, even some Skull and Bones in there. This guy right here in the background, Skull and Bones. This guy right here, Skull and Bones, future president of Yale. And James T. Shotwell's a key guy. He organizes it all. They're going up and down the New York subway line from Columbia University to the American Geographical Society to New York, the city of New York College, which are like 4 subway stops from each other. And they're drawing up new maps, but they're economists and professors of history, and specifically recruited for all of this work were people that were well-versed and had degrees in European history, especially medieval history, so the time prior. And you can see here, even somewhat surprisingly, wiki page, they mention who's Brandeis. Archibald Carey Coolidge, famous last name. He's directly related to the president. It comes 2 presidents after this, after one's assassinated. So he's essentially the next president after Wilson. 21 members of the inquiry later integrated into the larger American Commission to Negotiate Peace. Now, I could show you some crazy pictures. I've shared them many a time. And I won't at this moment because it takes away from what we're doing. I would have to stop to share and go find that. But we will get into some of that, okay? We're going to go into the files. So we are digressing. But a lot of those men are, well, all of those men are progressive, and some of them are even socialist. I mean, where the League of Nations is created was the Inter-Allied Labor and Socialist Conferences in London and Paris, 1914 through 1918, while the war is going on, and Sidney Webb is chairing it. So you can see there's quite a lot of prologue you got to understand. I'm trying to go as fast as I can, but I don't really care. I think it's easier for us to go through this in a reasonable manner at a digestible speed. And you can turn off this at any time. Take a break, but you got to come back. Nobody's laid this out like we have. You're not going to find anybody out there. I'm telling you. I have friends on Facebook that tell me they've gone and done word searches in other communities of historians, and Brandeis comes back with 0 hits. Same with progressivism. This whole movement. This is what the gatekeepers are keeping from you. I'm telling you. This is what we're revealing. We're here. He's involved in the telling of the new history with James Harvey Robinson and Charles Beard. And really why I wanted to get here and show this was that it says, all in all, he studied and taught at Columbia for nearly 50 years, where his closest friends were fellow professors Robinson and Charles Beard. And he's, Shotwell is, speaking at these social science research institutes, the London School of Economics. They lecture at these places. I've got newspaper clippings that show it. I've got pamphlets that were handed out at these things with their names and the subject matter on them, the years, the dates. Here's another one of those names that we mentioned a while back in this New York University papers source. Down here, we'd mentioned these men here. We've gone through quite a few of them now. Just the last 2 to go. John Spargo. And actually, let me just go over here for a sec, because look at the picture that they give us. Always the glasses. So he's a British political writer. He's active in the Socialist Party of America. Marxist socialism. He tried to meld the Protestant social gospel with Marxist socialism. Okay, I just read that. Anybody that's read Part 4, dispensationalist, the Brandeis Part 4, dispensationalists and the social gospel? Well, Brandeis literally marries into the family of the founder of the social gospel, Walter Rauschenbusch, and their great grandson is running the Alliance Church of today. The shit, what do they call it? I've talked about it in Part 4, but these 2 shows are separated by months. So United Alliance Church, can't remember, but anyways, Brandeis and Rauschenbusch, the founder of social gospel. If you want me to prove it, let's just go here. Won't be long before we're talking Walter Rauschenbusch. There, 2 major founders of the movement. Progress and poverty. See that? Henry George's. They're Georgists, progress and poverty. Also important in this is Pilgrim's Progress. When we start to talk about Christian dispensationalism, here he is associating with the progressives on the wiki page. It's the first time I've gone through all of this. But socialism and Christianity, very similar, a lot of parallels. When you start to really look at it, remove your personal stereotypical biased prejudice filters and just look at the 2 systems, you see that they're very similar, and we went through that in Part 4. Liberal Protestantism, and it's reforming, and it's the betterment or the perfection of the human being really is the idea here too, just like Illuminati. And now that's really bugging me, so am I allowed to do this? Just put up a tab. Hopefully you guys are seeing this. Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch, and he removes the C. So it's just more Americanized. Yeah, there's our man. Okay, he's the great grandson. The Interfaith Alliance Church. So think about this movement for a one world government also needs a one world religion. We're all very familiar with this melding of all of the 3. Those 3 religions really identify one specific spot in Jerusalem as the founding of all three of their religions, under the Golden Dome. You familiar with all of this? Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch removes the more German aspects to his last name and goes on to lead the Interfaith Alliance Church, meaning all of the faiths, achieving democracy together. Can we zoom in on that, please? Interfaith Alliance achieving democracy together. See, they're lying their face off because they know democracy doesn't actually exist. They've known it for a long time. Founders of liberalism talk about this. Brandeis talked about it. Lippmann in Public Opinion talks about it. I've got a great version of Public Opinion too. The first chapter, the world outside and the pictures in our head. And so there's the image, Public Opinion. So he talks about the entering wedge, the creation of a society governed by scientific expert. This is one of the main pillars of progressivism, along with preparedness, military preparedness, and everybody say it with me, efficiency. This is how you know a progressive. If they've got a hyphenated name, they're probably progressive. If they've got a nose ring, they're probably progressive. If they've dyed their hair, they're probably progressive, and they don't know it. This is the key part. They call themselves Democrats or liberals. Very rarely will they admit to being progressive. There's something in them that tells them, oh, you don't want to be progressive because that's radical. This is why when you start to see radical intervention in society, you are a progressive. Once you're advocating or enabling radical LGBTQ to go transgender into bestiality and whatever the hell else they want to do before it was stopped in Weimar, it's about demoralization. Demoralization, degradation, degeneration of the Western society. And this smiling character here is a continuation, an ominous continuity. He's got Brandeis blood in him. Interfaith Alliance, achieving democracy, all of us together. This is very progressive, together. Achieving democracy together. Here's this implied motion that it is already happening. And this is why I named that article Future Perfect, because that is actually a term in grammar, as in tense. What tense are you speaking in? Future tense, past tense, future perfect tense. Future perfect as if it's already waiting for us and it's completed and it's perfect. This is why they speak in those terms, future perfect. So I named part 1 and 2 in the creation of the League of Nations and sort of the unveiling of this progressive idea as the future perfect parts 1 and 2. Because utopia is never really shown. It's talked about a lot. The ends aren't talked about, but the means, the ways and means are, right? They're argued over. But Comte's positivism doesn't allow breaks on progressivism. So there's no time to question. You ever experienced that? You ever seen that with climate change and all these other things that are going on? Social reform. Anytime it's a progressive social reform, there's no time for questioning. So we can thank Auguste Comte for that, but it's essentially just using that technology, the idea that came from the brain of Auguste Comte, much like Hegel. Right? Hegel, I would say, is more complicit, but they're using these ways that were developed by these Enlightenment thinkers, the intellectual thinkers, these philosophers that we've put up there on a pedestal, and they're using them to direct society as if a helmsman on a ship, right? Which is really the definition of cybernetics and government, to control the mind. So hopefully you saw this. It's a tab. So you should be looking at Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch, and we don't have to look very much long. Got into the social gospel. We've already gone through that, part 4. So the last character mentioned the New York University papers there about the introduction of social democracy is this William James Ghent. He's an American socialist, journalist, and writer, as were all of the muckrakers, okay? Ida Tarbell, Lincoln Steffens, I got some of his books from back then. Okay, Ghent became interested in socialism in 1892, became active in a Bellamy club, and initially espoused the English evolutionary socialist ideas of Fabianism. Ghent would go on to contribute to such publications as the New York-based magazine, The American Fabian, Collectivist Society, which is what they really want to centralize everything. Here he is involved in the Intercollegiate Socialist Society, Rand School of Social Science. Already gone through here. Is the first appearance of Samuel Gompers, key guy. So those are the guys that are responsible for the introduction of socialism into America. We've already gone through the ones in LaSalle, Bernstein, Liebknecht, and Babel, who brought this thought from Prussia, and then it's adopted into America by the men that we just went through. Okay, so the final guy we want to really cover, because we can't tell this story without mentioning Walter Lippmann. Okay, it's a key guy, an American writer, reporter, political commentator, but he's a political philosopher. If you've read Plato's Republic, this is who they wanted to run the world. It's political philosophers, philosopher kings is how he said it. It says that he coined the term stereotype, but I found in earlier writings from somebody else the word stereotype. Here he is. They're talking about 1922's Public Opinion. So Lippmann also played a notable role as research director of Woodrow Wilson's post-World War I Board of Inquiry. So it's the same group, Inquiry. He's the first founding lifetime member. As a matter of fact, Lippmann is. And I'll prove it more as we go on. But, again, this is all, I've documented this to Kingdom Come. 7 Ways to Sunday. It's all just documented historical fact that most people are unaware of. And so here we are, another great example of progressivism. He had one of the longest syndicated newspaper columns. It was called Today and Tomorrow. So you can feel the progressivism in it, in that we are only talking about in real time and the future. There's no mention of yesterday or how we got here. This is effectively how progressivism has been swept under the radar, swept under the rug, continued as an underground movement, infiltrating both the Republican and Democratic Party, infiltrating mainstream media too. And so I say that because Lippmann has also been highly praised with titles ranging from the most influential journalist of the 20th century to father of modern journalism. Okay. So that's Blumenthal, Sidney Blumenthal, writing Walter Lippmann in American Journalism History Today. When you go through the biography of Lippmann, you can clearly see that modern journalism has taken on a lot of his personality. This sensationalized, opinionated world of journalism that we're all so sick and tired of, that doesn't tell you the truth. Well, Lippmann famously said in Public Opinion, the news and the truth are not the same thing, quote, end quote. He wanted to create a pseudo environment so close to the effective environment, the real environment, that they could then manipulate the real environment. Sound familiar? So Lippmann key, Michael Schutzen, he's a professor of journalism in the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia University. Now, the School of Journalism at Columbia is one of the most highly lauded journalist schools in the world, not just America. Go look it up. A lot of that I did in preparation for the Crisis of the Expert series that we never got to. That's very interesting, that I will get to. We get into the Walter Lippmann 2022 conference that's held at the Columbia University during COVID. And they talk about the importance of Walter Lippmann and all of his influences and history. So James W. Carey here considered Walter Lippmann's book, Public Opinion, which I just showed you, as, quote, the founding book of modern journalism, end quote. and also the quote founding book in American media studies, end quote. So any of these students that are coming through journalist schools, he's they are being taught through public opinion on how to be a journalist. You see how they corral, right? They covet, then they corral. And they frame these minds in the type of thinking school of thought, the dogma that they want them. So they've oriented them wrongly. If journalistic integrity is important to you, and having journalists tell you the truth, if that's important to you, well, they're totally disoriented, misoriented. And who's James W. Carey? I've covered this also. But an American communication theorist, media critic, and a journalism instructor at the University of Illinois and later Columbia. He's a member of the Peabody Awards Board, so he gives away the Peabodys. This guy's highly influential. Died in 2006 at age 71. Not before he is credited with developing the ritual view of communication. What's the ritual view of communication? It's witchcraft. Is a communications theory proposed by James W. Carey, wherein communication, the construction of a symbolic reality, construction of a symbolic reality, so not reality, represents, maintains, adapts, and shares the beliefs of a society in time, not knowledge, but beliefs of a society. In short, the ritual view conceives communication as a process that enables and enacts societal transformation. So how many of you sit down to the ritual view of communication at 6 o'clock evening news, or the 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock news, or the morning news? This is all ritual view of communication theory, and think that you're being informed about what's going on in the world today. No, it's about enacting societal transformation and social engineering, social control. They're shifting your mind. This is why I say the polls aren't an indicator of public opinion. They are a shaper of it. We must break our minds from these definitions that we think these things are. And it's uncomfortable, yep. But if you've never attached your identity to them, it's not painful. You just say, okay, I guess that confirms that thought about the mainstream media. I can't really trust them, can I? To do anything but transform society. And that's absolutely true. This is exactly what the mainstream media is meant for. When you look at the foundings, or the etymological foundings of the word media, medium, right? We get into witchcraft, the sending of magical things out into space and having them happen somewhere else unseen. I mean, isn't that black magic? You're channeling, you're broadcasting. I mean, when you get into the Talmud and the Kabbalah, especially, they start talking about abracadabra, it becomes because I say so. The occulted information. I mean, Aleister Crowley isn't far removed from the dispensationalist movement. All of these things. It doesn't take long before you're involved in deeply dark initiatives. So, James W. Carey, the founder of Ritual View of Communication, thinks that Walter Lippmann's the father of modern journalism, and he'd probably be right. I agree. So we think evening news, we sit down for the nightly news. Peter Jennings, whoever else is a talking head out there nowadays. I know Tucker Carlson. What's her name? The other one. I didn't want to say her name. I can't remember it. The black one. It's all bullshit, man. It's all, if it's in ritual view of communication, you're being manipulated for societal transformation. So back to Walter Lippmann quickly. This is the guy actually that LBJ visited in an unscheduled part of his itinerary right immediately after they buried JFK at Arlington. Okay, you can look into that. But LBJ, before he went anywhere else, stopped at Walter Lippmann's house for a meeting right after they buried JFK. He'd gone nowhere else. Now, I haven't been able to prove that, so that is speculation, but very intriguing line of research I'd like to go down. So anyways, Schützen, Carey, Media Studies, Lippmann. Here we go. Gilded Jewish Ghetto. What's the source? Walter Lippmann, Odyssey of a Liberal. But I bet you if I go and look, its source will be Walter Lippmann in the American Century, because that is exactly what it says in that book. I've got it underlined, highlighted, cataloged. See Sachs Collegiate Institute. So he's elite, upper class Jew. For his entire career, people wondered if he was an insider or an outsider. He's deeply influenced by George Santayana. Santayana is famous for saying, those that don't learn from their history are condemned to repeat it. William James, founder of American experimental psychology at basically the same time as Wilhelm Wundt, the Illuminati in Prussia. Graham Wallas, founder of Fabianism. Close personal friend of Walter Lippmann. I've got pictures of them sitting together. Graham Wallas dedicates his most famous book, The Great Society, to Walter Lippmann. He's Phi Beta Kappa. So he founds the New Republic with Herbert Croly, Walter Well. Who is Herbert Croly? He's a resident of the House of Truth. He writes The Promise of American Life, which is the Progressive Manifesto, centralized government, aggressive unionization, economic planning. It inspires the new nationalist movement of Roosevelt, which is the first progressive presidential platform. All hanging out together at this one place, this tiny little place called the House of Truth, 1727 19th Street. You can Google Earth it. Still stands. Nondescript. You'd never know it. Okay, so there's the wiki. He helps found the Intercollegiate Socialist Society. So this is that society that's developed at all of the Ivy League universities to network all of these socialist thinking pre-adolescent or university age students. Upton Sinclair. It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his paycheck makes it difficult for him to understand. I'm paraphrasing there, but that's his famous line. Might even say it here somewhere. But he's friends with Walter Lippmann. He's a writer. And so what do they turn the Socialist Party of America into? Something a little less socialist sounding, like the League for Industrial Democracy. Who writes the book, Industrial Democracy? Why are they naming their organization or renaming it from the Socialist Party of America to the League for Industrial Democracy? Because Sidney Webb wrote a book called Industrial Democracy, which trade unionism, collective bargaining is used to steer society. Sorry. Okay, Jack London here is involved. Clarence Darrow. Wesleyan, Columbia, Harvard, Princeton, Barnard. Barnard, I believe, is the women's college, right? Yeah, Women's Liberal Arts College. Okay, bing, 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 bing. All of the females that are coming out of there with MAs, Masters of Telling Stories. New York University Law School, University of Pennsylvania. 1960, they changed it to the Students for a Democratic Society. And what is that but the New Left? Starting to see how the progressives changed the definition of liberalism into the BLM today, when it used to be classical liberalism and the constitutional idea of the freedom to speak, to think, and to assemble together. See how that's starting to happen? Start to feel it as you're going through all of this information. So you're going to start to now identify those patterns throughout everything. This progressive moving forward, the idea of new all the time, because this goes back to John Stuart Mill and his book on liberty, where he talks about having one party of order, one party of progress, and pitting them together under hostile banners. Sound familiar? So nothing's really changed. And they, much like they borrowed from Comte, Hegel, they're borrowing these ideas from somewhere else as well. Herbert Marcuse, right? Let's just for fun click on the New Left and see how far do we go before Herbert Marcuse's name is mentioned, because he's really the father of the New Left, or the grandfather of the new. Oh, and look who's lounging by the pool here. Herbert Marcuse. What's he associated with? The Frankfurt School. What did they propel into American critical theory? He's celebrated as the father of the New Left. He's a Marxist. He taught Angela Davis at Brandeis University in the 60s. Abby Hoffman. Where does he teach? Berkeley. Chaos creator, the University of Chaos. Okay. So you can see how this, over the 20th century, the definition of liberalism completely changes from the classic liberal that just wants to work his own land and sort of stay to himself, pacifist, to this radical social reformers that are blowing up cities all around the world. And they, progressives today would scoff at that claim that they're supporters of war. They'd say, no, I'm anti-war. It's like, no, you're not. If you're progressive, you support war, U.S. foreign policy, going off killing people from good, safe distances because of military preparedness. Look at the defense contractors in America. Look at the Department of Defense itself. It's one of the world's largest employers. This is how they've leveraged the entire country, essentially. A good portion of the country is hired by the very creators of this. They're in their factories building the parts that go off and blow apart the other families living in other areas of the world. How do they put food on their table to feed their children? By blowing up other people. They're totally leveraged. You see that? So Boeing, Grumman, whatever they are, these major defense contractors, they all support war because war is progress. Peace is stagnation. Peace is bad for business, right? So it says that they changed their name to the League for Industrial Democracy. That's the very next tab. So the League for Industrial Democracy was founded as a successor to the Intercollegiate Socialist Society in 1921. Members decided to change its name to reflect a more inclusive and more organizational perspective. Really, they just didn't want to be associated with socialism. And I've got a direct quote from Walter Lippmann coming. So the ISS was founded by Upton Sinclair, Walter Lippmann, Clarence Dow, Jack London, with the stated purpose of throwing light on the worldwide movement of industrial democracy known as socialism. Brandeis is establishing industrial democracy through regulation and legislation as the U.S. Supreme Court Justice and the People's Attorney. Lippmann's doing it through the media and other social aspects. Social aspects. There's Harry W. Laidler. I think we got into him, did we not? But here's Florence Kelly. Anybody that's gone through parts 1 to 4, you know that Florence Kelly is intimate with Brandeis, working intimately with Brandeis and his other cousin, the Goldmark. He's married to his wife, so he's really sleeping with his second cousin. Brandeis is a little Frankist, don't you think? So these guys form the base for the muckrakers. The muckrakers, when we want to talk Hegelian dialectic, they are creating the situation. They are identifying the problems in industrial America. But they're doing that. They're putting a ball on the tee for the progressives now to institute and regulate. And when you look into the backgrounds of the makers of McClure's magazine, the editors, the writers, and then the founders of American magazine, they're all socialists. And it's not wiki pages that I refer to, it's the letters of Lincoln Steffens, right? Again, shout out to McLeod Bookstore in Vancouver, Don, right? The letters of Lincoln Steffens, 2 volumes, goes deep into his association relationships with Walter Lippmann and his socialist leanings. I mean, he goes and meets with Lenin, right? He's almost in charge of that mission that goes over, the route mission, or there's several that go. But these guys are devoted Marxists, socialists, and there's no boundaries. They're traveling over and meeting personally with Lenin and talking about whatever it is. Obviously, they're conspiring to further the ideas in America. You know, the philosopher John Dewey was elected president of LID. He's Columbia University, and he's super famous, progressive. He's running in the same circles. The Student League for Industrial Democracy, SLID. It's like a slippery slope, right? Once you start calling things League for Industrial Democracy, things start to slip. So, Walter Lippmann. Let's go to the Yale archives. Okay, we're off of Wiki entirely. Now, this is how I research. Anybody that's interested in knowing how I came about all this information, it's in my process. I don't take anything for granted. I identify communication holes where things haven't been circuitous to connect, right? Chaining reasoning together. I guess I was blessed with it, but I find it just common sense and critical thinking. So we are in the Walter Lippmann Papers archives at Yale. This is where a lot of his papers ended up. Okay, there's a scope and contents here. And you can drop that down. And it tells you more detail about the papers themselves, a little bit about Walter Lippmann, all of the books that he wrote. Magazines. That might be the books that are there, and magazines that are there at the Yale archives, because there's far more books that he wrote. Okay, there's further detail as to how those papers arrived there. But we want to get to something called additional description, which very few go to, but it's right at the bottom. If you just click on this, it opens up a whole new world. So Walter Lippmann was born in New York City on September 23rd, 1889. In 1910, after graduating Harvard, he began his career as a reporter. So today and tomorrow, New Republic, all things that we've now gone through, the inquiry, a group of experts assembled at the request of Woodrow Wilson to collect data. There it is on the Yale archives. In preparation for a peace conference. Military preparedness begins there. There was a preparedness movement. We should probably get into that. But I don't want to digress. So, straight from the Yale papers, goes through chronology. It's biographical and historical chronology of Walter Lippmann, right back to when he was a kid and his parents entered Sachs Collegiate Institute, wrote his first editorial at age 13 as editor-in-chief. Oh, wins prizes. Which prize? The Horowitz Prize for general excellence. So confirmed as a member of Temple Emmanuel, Lexington Street, New York City. So that's Reform Judaism, otherwise known as what? Everybody say it with me. Progressive Judaism. Go look it up. Again, awarded. Is that the second time he's awarded? 1903 and 1906, he gets the Horowitz Prize again for just general excellence, devotion to school duty, faithful devotion to school duties. Graduated Sachs Collegiate Institute. He's going to come out of there with a Master of Arts degree, or at least a Bachelor of Arts degree. He is whenever they go to these collegiate institutes or these school for boys, grammar schools, that is what they're teaching. Grammar, logic, rhetoric. They're teaching the first three steps of the liberal arts. How to put symbols together to make words, how to put words together to make sentences, how to put sentences together to make paragraphs, and how to put paragraphs together to make a complete composition. Make it understandable, attractive, and beautiful. This is really grammar. Entered Harvard, lived at 12 Weld Hall. This is where Santayana's working. He's one of the winners of the Harvard College Prize for Academic Distinction. So he's following right along. He's being groomed beautifully. Elected to the Circolo Italiano Society. Taught evening classes at Cambridge, Social Union, as an instructor in fine arts. Interesting. One of the winners of the Harvard College Prize for Academic Distinction, active in Harvard chapter of the Intercollegiate Socialist Society. He founds it. He helps found Intercollegiate Socialist Society with Upton Sinclair, Clarence Darrows. So here he is, elected in 1909. This is before he's even out of Harvard, people. He's elected to the Cosmo Club, the Cosmopolitan Club. This is a gentleman's club. This is where they all congregate, J.P. Morgan and all of these people that are moving society. Cosmopolitan Club is one of the most important ones. He's a member of the debating, philosophical, and political clubs. Joined the Harvard Socialist Club and later became president of the Harvard Socialist Club. He's active in the Intercollegiate Socialist Society, attending conventions and organizing chapters at other colleges. Completed his requirements for his bachelor, cum laude, so he's third in class. Sigma cum laude, magna cum laude, and cum laude. But he's Phi Beta Kappa, like everybody else. 1910, he's assistant. After graduating from Harvard, he's the assistant to George Santayana, the Department of Philosophy. Guy, you know, we're talking political philosophers, and those that don't know or learn from their history are condemned to repeat it. Also studied for master's degree. So he's trying to get his Master of Arts degree. He's again active in the Intercollegiate Socialist Society. So he's elected board of editors for the Harvard Monthly. And within 3 weeks of earning his master's degree, he's dropped his studies, left Harvard, like he didn't even give a shit, and went to work for a socialist newspaper guy at Boston Common, a known socialist newspaper. There he is working with Lincoln Steffens, Everybody's Magazine, that's progressive. We're all in it together, forward together. Everybody's united. Lippmann in 1911, so this is about the time he's moving into the House of Truth, elected to executive committee of the Intercollegiate Socialist Society. So he's on the executive committee. That means he's in charge of funneling money and direction. Regular contributor to the International magazine through 1912, of course, because this whole movement is about internationalism. When you go back to look at Marx, this is really what he wanted. Look at Immanuel Kant, the universal mind he talks about. So 1912 is when Walter Lippmann moves into the House of Truth. He's still writing articles for the ISS. Joins the Socialist Party of New York County and Socialist Press Club in 1913. He's definitely living at the House of Truth by now. And invited by Herbert Crowley, his roommate, to become one of the 6 members of the editorial board of the new weekly, The New Republic, which is still going today and probably has a picture of Obama on. The 6 members were Herbert Crowley, Francis Hackett, Walter Lippmann, Philip Little, Charlotte Rudyard, and Walter Weil, but there are more, including Louis Brandeis. Um, and the other guy we mentioned there with the 3 names, Alvin Saunders, he's key here too. First issue of the New Republic. He writes Drift and Mastery, which is also a progressive manifesto in many ways. Are the people to be mastered, or are they going to continue to drift? So you can see Hegelian, problem, reaction, solution again. Lippmann famously writes that we are the bewildered herd. And so it's probably right here that I should share from Drift and Mastery, from the Haiti Trust website, this very informative quote from Walter Lippmann. Okay, this is I think it's his first book that he ever wrote. And at the very bottom of that page, it says the adjective progressive is what we like. And the word new, be it the new nationalism of Roosevelt, the new freedom of Wilson, or the new socialism of the syndicalists, these trade unionists that want to strike and war. So progressive, whether we're talking Roosevelt, Wilson, or even the socialists. So you can see they're all combining under this banner of progressivism. So when we talk about Marxism, socialism being in America, they're really covers for progressivism. Okay? We've got to reevaluate how we look at this, the perspective that we gain when we understand the progressive era. We no longer have perceptions of how things are, influenced by our own personal bias, stereotypical prejudice filters. We look at the history, we lay it out, we lay out the artifacts, and we see that it's actually communism and socialism that's a cover for how progressivism snuck in underneath the radar and have totally scientifically managed our entire society, created the Federal Reserve, subjugated us under usury and speculation, surveilling the shit out of us, right? This Brandeis is one of the first to ever do, his rights to privacy article in the Harvard Law Review, right? The Harvard Law Review, Brandeis invents himself. He's the founder, and then he writes the rights to privacy. And from this article comes much precedent, including today's surveillance state. DARPA names their domestic surveillance program Brandeis in 2015. Now, I hope I'm blowing your mind right now, because we need you guys to wake up to this shit in the unadulterated, uncensored Brandeis Part 5, Industrial Democracy and the Protocol of Peace. So what is the Protocol of Peace? It's authored by Brandeis and Lewis Marshall, but primarily of Lewis Brandeis. And where are we but the significant documents illuminating American Jewish experience website, AmericanJewishArchives.org. So again, we're reputable. Nobody's going to question your sources when you tell them crazy shit from here. So the Protocol of Peace and the Industrial Revolution of American Labor Relations on the 2nd of September 1910. It's a key date. New York City cloakmakers strike ended with the signing of an agreement known as the Protocol of Peace, thereby ushering in a new era of industrial labor relations. The work stoppage began on the 7th of July, 1910. So these are strikes, the syndicalism, and the lawyers, the employers, and the manufacturing owners were basically all Jewish. Now you can go back to Jewish historians that are reputable professors of history at the University of Wisconsin, Princeton, Yale, Harvard. They all talk about it like this. It's not, the only thing it is hidden. So International Ladies Garment Workers Union. So this is about the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, where all of these women had to jump to their death from the high rise because all of the escape routes were locked by the manufacturing owners to keep them working. I think this is Hegelian, and I honestly think it was intentional to make such a catastrophic scene that out of it came this Protocol of Peace. I swear, because Brandeis, when he's establishing Israel is fronted by military groups. Because over there, man, diplomacy ain't going to work. You're going to have to blow some stuff up and physically remove people or push them back. So it wouldn't be beyond the realm of thought here, knowing that Brandeis and this group of progressives is actually instituting or initiating some of these catastrophic events like the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. You know, it's out of the Ludlow massacre that a lot of the establishment of our 5 days a week and 8 hours a day work system comes from. That's 1914 that happened. So it's not long after this. But the Protocol of Peace sets major precedent. Strikers protested horrific working conditions, low wages, and demanded the implementation of the closed shop. So here's one of those terms that we have to get familiar with before we can even get to the article, which is coming soon. I know we're going long, but if you need to, pause it, come back. So the strike was spearheaded by a group of Jewish labor organizers, including Samuel Gompers, founder of the American Federation of Labor, Meyer London, an attorney and future Socialist Party congressman, and the king of the cloak makers, Joseph Brandeis, who was the head of the ILGWU. So that's the union leader working with Meyer London and the creator of the American Federation of Labor Union to strike against these conditions. So they are the controlled opposition, right? This is the reaction now to the problem. And thanks to Brandeis coming along, they're going to find a synthesis or a solution. So there's a thesis that working conditions must improve. There's an antithesis that creates this investigation. And then the synthesis of bringing two usually polar opposites together, like we see the Canadian liberal left and the American Republican right being merged into the tech-native America today. So who's mentioned here right away? But Louis Brandeis. So the ILGW and the garment manufacturers who had also organized and created their own trade group, the Cloak, Suit, and Skirt Protective Association, contacted future U.S. Supreme Court Justice and prominent lawyer Louis Brandeis to act as an intermediary during negotiations. Now, he walked into a room full of attorneys and took control. He's a master of arts. His SAT scores, or whatever you called them back then at Harvard, were the highest ever, and they lasted as the record for 80 years. In Brandeis' entire life, he had the highest records at Harvard. So he's a super intelligent, or he's got major power behind him. Either way, we see he walks into a room of equally efficient men, and he takes control, same as he did with the Taylor Society and Scientific Management, same as he did with the New Freedom Campaign and the establishment of the Federal Reserve. You know, he's a leader of men, and he has major respect as the sage advisor to all. And, you know, Walter Lippmann wanted Brandeis everywhere. This is all written. So Brandeis was instrumental in making significant progress towards a successful compromise between labor and management. Go back and watch the movie Metropolis. That's what the whole storyline is about, is bringing labor and capital together. And in there's a dream in which all of the workers walk up the stairs into the mouth of a burning monster called Moshiach. 1921, that movie comes out. It doesn't even have speaking in it. So you can see right from the get-go, this push has been going on. And what do they do but create a machine woman in Metropolis? So, however, by the time the negotiations were finalized, famed Jewish lawyer Louis Marshall took over as the head mediator. Marshall infused many of Brandeis' ideas into a final agreement between the two sides and gave the Protocol of Peace its name. Now, Brandeis is officially the primary author of the Protocol of Peace. Louis Marshall is a Zionist working directly underneath Louis Brandeis in the creation of Israel. I can prove it. Louis Marshall is considered a lieutenant of the Brandeis group, much like Stephen Weiss, Jacob de Haas. I mean, we've gone through that, part 3. There's no need for me to even digress there. So the Protocol of Peace, as summarized by historian Richard A. Greenwald, was revolutionary because it went beyond hours and wages to the heart of the problems facing industrial America, democracy in the workplace. So they create a board, joint board, and we're going to get into it. There's a 3-member board that Brandeis is the head of, and Walter Wiles, one of his assistants. So 2 out of the 3 are living at the House of Truth. So they mentioned earlier closed shop. Now they mentioned preferential shop or the preferred shop. This is really the difference between unions and non-union shops. So the preferential shop is the one that only takes union workers, not unskilled labor. This is a term that Brandeis actually, I think, coins, and is how they resolve it, because the laborer, the worker in the factory, did not want to be scientifically managed and told what to do, like micromanaged. This is where we get micromanaging from. So they established this rule that largely still exists today, that a lot of these factories accept only unionized workers. So you have to already be under the umbrella. Your authority has to already have been taken away before you can go and work at a factory. This is really the removal of man from the power of his own labor, the industrial democracy. So the preferential shop was a compromise between union leaders who wanted a workforce comprised completely of union members and employers who did not want their management decisions dictated by the threat of strike, engineered by Brandeis, which encouraged both fair treatment of workers by manufacturers and an increased sense of ownership and responsibility among union workers or members. Protocol also included the establishment of arbitration boards, this is the key, which included members of unions, manufacturers, and neutral third parties to settle labor disputes. Now, they looked at the labor union as the entering wedge, and the labor union leader as that personification, okay? Because one person or a few members of a commission are far more manipulable or exploitable than the 100,000 workers. So they got it down to be able to exploit just a few people, and that's far easier to do. So this is, you think of the plantation and Mr. Jones's plantation and how that's an analogy to the state. Well, you can also look at it in this sense, that the manager that comes along to manage the plantation in the place of the owner is the trade union leader. Well, it may appear that everything has changed and they are speaking kindly and concerned for the health and well-being and safety of the worker. They're not actually. You see it through their actions. You see, labor, if they could get rid of it, it's the largest cost to manufacture. So this is why they want to go to a machine-based industrial society. But what are they going to do with all of us that are sitting around with nothing better to do than to learn of Brandeis and the Progressive Era? Initiate experimental vaccine programs. Put at the head of Pfizer only veterinarians. Okay, so some of the other sources I go through: The Trade Unions and Fabian and Socialism by Jack Millets. Got into the first Red Scare, got into Brandeis. And so we go to the story now. How far are we in? I'll see how long I can go here, but it's important to cover this story, and it's actually not all that long. So into the body of the work, we explain a lot of what we'd already talked about here. Sidney Webb, but we bring sources. And so Mark Bevere, straight out of that article that I mentioned earlier, Sidney Webb is often represented as a descendant of the utilitarians. This idea of being of good utility for the greater good, avoiding pain, and chasing pleasure. Utilitarianism. Social democracy, there's that term, and the welfare state thus stand as the continuing development of Enlightenment rationalism. Alternatively, Webb appears as a representative of a new managerial and administrative class. Social democracy and the welfare state here stand as the elitist and bureaucratic expressions of the power of this class. So it was through his early legislative career as the people's lawyer that Louis D. Brandeis established much of what he even called himself an industrial democracy, from even before his earliest precedent-setting cases working with the National Consumers League. This goes back to Florence Kelley Goldmark's. In 1906, we see an early career obsessed with labor law adopted directly from Sidney and Beatrice Webb's famous book, Industrial Democracy, written first in 1897. It published again in 1902 or 1905. The purpose of this paper was to first map out for the reader the important personal connections between Brandeis and the Fabian bred idea of industrial democracy. And then secondly, show how Brandeis used the Fabian method of industrial democracy, trade unionism, collective bargaining, combined with labor relations and scientific management to impose lasting socialism and even fascism in America as early as 1912. So we've proven all of that in previous articles. Principles of scientific management. We show how the owner of the House of Truth, Valentine, is really the inventor of labor relations, and how Brandeis coins the term scientific management and popularizes Taylorism previously. So first and foremost, both Brandeis and Webb's held an identical appreciation for trade unionism and collective bargaining. While Brandeis was the great American practitioner, Beatrice Webb coined the term collective bargaining. They both looked to the union leader as a necessary expert, placed deliberately between labor and capital as a spokesperson for the worker. This introduction of small arbitration boards or councils to settle labor grievances is a common pattern evident in both the work of Brandeis and the Webbs. Secondly, both Brandeis and the Fabians shared an important common friend, Walter Lippmann, who wrote of, quote, intelligence bureaus, end quote, led by expert, quote, entering wedges, end quote, in his famous Public Opinion. Lippmann, both a founding American Progressive and Fabian Society member, was very close friends with Brandeis and Graham Wallace, another famous founding Fabian. We've covered all of that. So in much the same way, they replaced material force of arms with an international diplomacy to get away from fighting and war. They use collective bargaining to get away from striking, syndicalism. Same theory, same thought. Collective bargaining, a term and idea the Webbs pioneered, was therefore central to industrial democracy. These trade agreements would, in the best of all possible worlds, have the status of law because they would have government sanction as legally enforceable contracts. Ultimately, the Webbs believed that unions would bargain directly with the state in industry-wide agreements, total blanket agreements. See, you boil the whole country down to one person or a board, thereby ensuring the betterment of society as a whole. And that's from Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, The Protocols of Peace in the Industrial Democracy and Progressive Era, New York, by Richard A. Greenwald. And as Mark Bevan states above in the introductory quote, from times long predating both Brandeis and Webb, men have attempted to resolve the human condition through experimental social reform. A century prior to Brandeis and Webb, for example, Robert Owen and the early 19th century cooperative movements were foundational to Henri de Saint-Simon, Auguste Comte, and the rise of utopian socialism of the mid-19th century in France. The more modern Fabian-led ethical socialist movement of the early 20th century, a direct outgrowth of Robert Owen and those same utopians. It's just an evolution of the idea of socialism and how they're going to impose it on society. So in fact, when we fully trace back to source the modern ideas found within the Webbs' very socially pivotal industrial democracy, we see, as Bevan does, a continuity of thought of deeper historical importance and value, as all of these men, Brandeis and the Webbs included, find brotherhood with the even earlier utilitarian philosophy of 17th and 18th century thinkers like Jeremy Bentham and David Hume, to be of good utility, to be of good utility for society, and to always be mindful of the greater good, as suggested by Bentham. So from the preface of Industrial Democracy, Sidney and Beatrice Webb, even those who regard our facts as accurate and accept our economic theory as scientific will only agree in our judgment of trade unionism and in our conception of its permanent but limited function in the industrial democracy of the future. So from KU Scholars Works from Kansas University, he, Brandeis, spoke before citizens groups and legislative bodies wrote articles for popular magazines, put his ideas about industrial democracy in the briefs he submitted as a lawyer, the Brandeis briefs, and later in the opinions he wrote as a Supreme Court justice and advised presidents Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt. Yeah, Brandeis is part of Roosevelt's brain trust, which should blow your mind if you know anything about that. So it is critical to know here, and certainly worth the digression, that by being identified as descendants of the utilitarians, both Brandeis and Webbs are immediately associated with the thoughts of Jeremy Bentham, the father of utilitarianism. We've gone through all of that, I think, to a degree where you all understand it. I'm just connecting Brandeis and Webb back to Bentham, the utilitarians, the idea of greater good. We heard this through COVID. Okay. And so George Bernard Shaw, Fabian founder, here says there is an extraordinary number of people of whom I would want to kill. So go to the article and you can press on that. I'm not sure if my volume is going to work, but if you're interested in that, you can go on YouTube. It's there too. Just put in George Bernard Shaw, extraordinary number of people of whom I want to kill. And he says it ethically. Okay, so we'll get through this quickly. But a quick mention of Auguste Comte is widely considered the first philosopher of science, the father of social science or sociology. Sociology was the original term coming out of Prussia, but they broke it into several and they called it the social sciences. And founder of modern positivism. Positivism, a great rejection of all ideas that aren't gathered through experience, intuition, introspection, considered meaningless through the positivist verification principle, as would be your gut intuition, right? Your gut feeling, your gut instinct. He's going to tell you it doesn't matter. You must experience things before we can say that they're true. Burned as sophistry, those ideas. We mentioned Walter Lippmann's pseudo environment, blissfully ignorant population of television watchers. Okay. So another quote from Industrial Democracy in the preface. In the Anglo-Saxon world of today, we find that trade unions are democracies. That is to say, their internal constitutions are all based on the principle of government of the people, by the people, for the people. So this is what Brandeis mentions often and is initiated through Fabian socialism, the idea that democracy starts on the shop floor and then it grows to include that whole factory and other factories in industry, and then to the rest of the factories in the state, and then across the nation. It's going to build this idea of democracy. So that sort of agenda or ways and means shared by both Webb and Brandeis. So Sidney and Beatrice Webb wrote in their scientific analysis of British industrial relations, The History of Trade Unionism, it's their first book, 1894, that sociology, the social sciences, like all other sciences, which are soft sciences, by the way, can advance only upon the basis of a precise observation of actual facts. So they're trying to base these soft sciences like psychology, economics, and all of these things as hard sciences. They're trying to put them into the same lexicon, the same consideration. And I remember growing up in the 70s and 80s, and everybody thought that psychology or psychiatry was a soft science. It wasn't provable. And they've worked hard to eliminate any dissenting voice. So from the Triangle Shirtwaist, Richard A. Greenwald, page 11, for the Webbs and their American counterparts, the professional expert, whether civil servant or representative, was of decisive importance in bringing about industrial democracy. Americans quickly noticed the idea as it appealed to their newly found sense of rational or objective science as a means to solve social and economic problems. This is directly out of progressivism. So American adherence to industrial democracy included future Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis saw in it a vehicle to rationalize American industry within a democratic framework. Okay, so maybe it's probably here I can digress a second and say that if you ever want to go look at a book and it's unpublished or it's not being published anymore, it's out of print, you can find it usually at archive.org. So triangle shirt waist Greenwald, and I'll just put in archive and usually it'll come up. Triangle fire, the protocol of peace and industrial democracy in progressive era New York. So we can go to page 11. Well, we first must borrow it. So you have to get an account, and it's free to sign up. But once you do, a lot of these books I found here. So we can go to, it's probably a little further than page 11, the real page 11. Here's 3, here's 9, 10, 11. So there it is. American adherence to industrial democracy, including future Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, saw in it a vehicle to rationalize American industry within a democratic framework. Okay, I'm just showing you social efficiency, industrial Democrats and social efficiency. Okay, I'm just showing you that, verifying for you where I get these things from. Okay, and how my process works. So I invite you to go to Internet Archive and create yourself an account, because you can go look at these yourself, and man, the books are amazing. So from page 10 of the same book, many American progressives were keenly aware of European experiences with labor problems. You can see this all comes from Britain. This progressive era starts in Britain because this is where the Industrial Revolution starts. The problems arose quicker there than they did in the States because they were further along in the development, the evolution of industrial democracy. So they studied Europe for guidance or a model. Industrial democracy, one such import, is most often associated with Sidney and Beatrice Webb and their circle of British Fabian socialists. The Webbs, in their seminal 1897 book, Industrial Democracy, called for a reinvigorated democracy, one where unions played a central role. For the Webbs, modern capitalist industry had put an undue strain on democratic society. They always blame capitalism. So unions could bring democracy to industry because they were, or at least could be, representational bodies for workers. As democratic institutions themselves, they offered the best hope of bringing democracy to industry by providing a countermeasure to unchecked industry. Problem, reaction, solution. So Brandeis was very familiar with the work of the Fabian Society since as early as the Haymarket Affair on May 4th, 1886. His close friends at the House of Truth included Fabian Society members, the aforementioned Walter Lippmann and Harold Lasky. Webb founds the London School of Economics, New School for Social Research. Before it's the New University of Columbia. We've gone through this. And a devout supporter of Zionism, who cultivated close relationships with many progressive founders, Lippmann, Brandeis, Frankfurter, Charles Beard, serving as a conduit between American and British social reformers, a marriage of cultural Marxism and progressivism. So here's a picture with Walter Lippmann here and Graham Wallace here and Harold Lasky here. I'm not sure who the female is, but that's how close they were. When Lippmann went to Europe, he'd visit Graham Wallace and vice versa. And in the preface to The Great Society, if you want to go look at it, you can do it again. Just go back out here, do a search. Great Society. What was LBJ's presidential platform? The Great Society. Who did he visit right after burying JFK? Walter Lippmann. Who does Graham Wallace dedicate this book to? Walter Lippmann. Okay, here's the trivium. Grammar, logic, rhetoric that you saw right off the start. I think you might have. Maybe you didn't. Maybe end with it. I'll show you. When I take the video off, I've got the grammar, logic, rhetoric triangle. It also exists in the Kabbalistic tree of life and is, in the lower degrees of a Freemasonic education and in the highest echelons of the university system. The address is the London School of Economics, connects all three. Here's the Fabian window that we've gone through extensively. Fabian Society logo is a wolf in sheep's clothing. The founders of Fabianism here with the world on an anvil, and they are slamming it with sledgehammers, remolding it near to the heart's desire, as it says across the top. This is the George Bernard Shaw window. This is George Bernard Shaw in green. Edward Pease over here blowing air onto the fire to keep it hot. And what of the world is being shown? Amazingly, but Mackinder's pivot point of the world, Asia. This is Zbigniew Brzezinski's grand chessboard. This is where the clash of civilizations, Samuel P. Huntington, CFR member, talks about that very area as critical. Where are we fighting today? Where was World War I fought? Where was World War II fought? Right there. Mackinder's great pivot point, that they all believe that if you own this piece of land, you could own the world. And who owns that today? But generally Russia. H.G. Wells is on this window here to the far left. What books are they reading? But New World for Old, Fabian Tracts and Essays, History of Trade Unionism. It's a Fabian book. Industrial Democracy, Sidney and Beatrice Webb. Minority Report on the Poor Law. Now, Minority Report may remind you of a movie in the 90s by Tom Cruise where they could predict crime. This is exactly what they are thinking about back then. How to predict crime, how to prevent recidivism, having a criminal commit a crime and then redo it, and recommit a crime. They wanted to be able to prevent it. So Minority Report isn't a futuristic idea. It's an idea long thought of by our social engineers. If you think about it, it totally makes sense. We're going to get into this in part 6, the science of law, Brandeis part 6, the science of law, because they all admit that law is the best form of social control. And who creates this but the founders of social science? And where did they find it but Prussia? And what did they do? But they got their PhDs in Prussia and brought over all of this idea to America, the social sciences. And the social sciences are really the research of human beings. This is why the social sciences are so predominant today, because most universities are research universities. They're not educational anymore. You don't go there for a degree on this or that. You go to learn how to control society, managerial class. This is right. They're going to use all of the tools that they have at their disposal. There's the names of the other people there. And H.G. Wells authored the book, New World for Old. He's also author of a couple of other amazingly titled books. The Open Conspiracy, and something else. Can't remember, but amazing books. I have some here. H.G. Wells' two-part Science of Life. The Outline of History, a two-parter by H.G. Wells. He's somewhat of a political philosopher, is he not? And most of these men are filling those roles. So maybe to finish off the maybe last half hour of this show, we're going to get into how Brandeis created the Protocol of Peace, how this went down 1910, 1911, and he established our 5 day a week, 8 hour day. Essentially, it's a little bit different, but you can see that that is the moment that that gets established. And from there, there's many other changes and evolutions of the idea, but here we are still today with that same Monday to Friday, waiting for the weekend. So now that we've made a substantial enough connection between progressive Brandeis and the Fabians, how exactly did Brandeis institute industrial democracy in the United States? Brandeis made himself the chairman of the arbitration board of all grievances, along with two expert assistants, Walter Weil and Hamilton Holt. Walter Weil writes in that same ominous year, 1913, The New Democracy. He's a resident at the House of Truth. He's living there. He's a socialist Marxist. He's rubbing shoulders with the Anglo-American establishment, Eustace Percy, and the other majorly influential Anglo-American Rhodes Scholar. I can't remember his name right now, but they're both living at the House of Truth. So you can see this convolution of all kinds of Marxist, progressive, Anglo-American, Rhodesian ideas. The last to speak after a roll call of progressive efficiency experts was Brandeis, the owner of the House of Truth and primary inventor of industrial relations, who we talked about earlier, Robert Grosvenor Valentine. He's there testifying, as does Frederick Winslow Taylor, Henry Gantt, Karl Barth, Emerson. These are all names familiar if you read part 2, Principles of Scientific Management. This is the Taylor Society that Brandeis controlled. Well, they're there identifying, or they're there providing testimony in this, again, another problem reaction solution. They're saying, yes, labor is in a difficult place, but we've got this thing called scientific management that can help us straighten out all of the chaos and bring order to labor. Because what they're doing right now is preparing for war. Or, this is 1910. They are preparing for war. They already know that there's going to be a world war. They already want to go to Hungary to get Palestine for a Jewish homeland. This is all in the literature. As early as 1905 or 6, I see Brandeis speaking at Zionist events. So we are talking about a giant problem reaction solution that caused millions of lives just to have a Jewish homeland. And where is that situation right now? It was clearly understood that nothing shall be done to prejudice the already existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. But different story here today, 100 and something years later. Really, Israel founded in 1917, same time as all of this has happened. Well, not the same time as this Protocol of Peace, but 7 years later. Brandeis systematically works in the first 4 years of Wilson's presidential term on domestic policy, establishing the Federal Reserve. And then in the second term of Wilson, years 5 through 8, they established the International Code of Law, this international world that we live in. So below, I've included important excerpts taken from Brandeis's testimony. So if they should fail to agree, then there was recourse to this Board of Arbitration with Brandeis as chairman. So if the laborers or workers had a problem with safety conditions or they weren't getting the pay that they wanted, they went to an arbitration board, and guess who was the chairman? Louis Brandeis, the guy that made up the whole system. So the acting chairman, who were the others? Mr. Williams, Mr. Hamilton Holt, and Mr. Walter Weil of New York. Now you can go to the actual documents. I've provided them. I have them all categorized, cataloged, collected. This is what's going on. Not in industry, meaning these men were not part of industry. No, I think they were all outside of the industry. I am told that the Board of Grievances, the commission, did not dispose of the cases fast enough, and it was charged on the part of the union that they were allowed to accumulate. The union became more and more dissatisfied. They demanded there be an umpire, that there should be somebody to cast the deciding vote on that board. That led to a fierce controversy in which several good men went down, and it very nearly ruptured the protocol and caused a general strike. It was then changed to this plan that I have suggested, and the employers consented to having an impartial man. But with this change, that instead of this impartial man being at the head of the Board of Grievances, that he was only to be one of three and two clerks and himself who should act as this committee, so that the Board of Grievances becomes a consultative body now and is now in active use for the adjustment of grievances. So he's boiled it down to three members on a board, two of them clerks, and Brandeis, the founder of the whole system, as the key arbitrator, the chairman. So we have Brandeis acting chairman with two clerks having complete say in all grievances nationwide, not members of the industry, but labor experts. And one of the experts is Yale graduate and Columbia social scientist Hamilton Holt, editor of the liberal magazine, The Independent, and on the executive committee of William Howard Taft's The League to Enforce Peace. This is one of the key groups that create the League of Nations. Holt, a founder of the NAACP, along with Zionist Stephen Weiss, muckrakers Lincoln Steffens, Ray Stannard Baker, women's activist Jane Addams, and Florence Kelly, all founders of the NAACP. Brandeis personally teaches them, like I said earlier, on how to be political activists by demanding or bringing light to an injustice and then demanding redress. This is the two-step process that Brandeis initiated through the Brandeis Brief that changed not just social activism, but law, our entire society. Lawyers today, I mean, Brandeis creates the clerkship model. He's so widely influential, it's incredible. And these 10-part series don't do enough to actually thresh it all out. So the NAACP, founded in 1910, the same year as the Protocol of Peace, were authored. Here it is important to note the same cast of characters unveiled in our two-part Future Perfect articles and throughout our Rise of the Experts series are never more than 1 degree separated from Brandeis. We see nearly the same list of people who later founded the League of Nations, the precursor to the UN. Now, I can prove that too if anybody has a question of whether the UN is continuous to the idea of the League of Nations. It is documented on their own website, as are here legislating labor, 1908 to 1916. Same people. So Walter Weil, an intellectual leader of the Progressive Era, and as a resident of the House of Truth and fellow founder of the New Republic magazine, a close confidant of Louis D. Brandeis. While acting as Brandeis' clerk, here showing just how close they were. The testimony of Louis D. Brandeis. Mr. Chairman, my special interest in this subject arises from a conviction that in the first place, the working men, and in the second, the members of the community generally, can attain the ideals of our American democracy only through an immediate increase and perhaps a constant increase in the productivity of man. We got to make man as productive as possible. So when that introduction of a method of increasing the productivity of man was made, labor did not get the share to which it was entitled. With the advent of the new science of management has come the next great opportunity for increasing labor's share in production. And it seems to me, therefore, of the utmost importance not only that the science should be developed and should be applied as far as possible, but that it should be applied in cooperation with the representatives of organized labor in order that labor may now, in this new movement, get its proper share. That's from page 991, Efficiency Systems and Labor Commissions and Industrial Relations. You can go look that up. There's a lot there too. The productivity of man is something I want to talk about here, because what they did with the assembly line, and you look at it now today, the men stand on the assembly line essentially. And so what's stopping the manufacturing owner from speeding up the assembly line and making the man more productive? He's just going to have to work quicker to get the parts and whatever that he's putting together. And so this division of labor where one man doesn't create the entire car, he installs the tires or he puts on the steering wheel. This is a removal of our own power of labor. It's divided. You talk about divide and conquer. Well, the division of labor happens, and then the division of intellectual property, the division of information, all come after it. Apparently we're doing good at the farm today. I've left the farm in my wife's very capable hands, and we're having a good sales day, which reminds me that if you ever want to support our work here at the History of Propaganda, you can through our e-transfer. That's the only way I'm going. So it's our email, hellshalfacrefarmskelowna@gmail.com. You want to throw me a 20 for all of this information because it's very important. That's how you do it. So here we see the making of the modern day social contract. This is why we've concluded that Brandeis is really the primary author of our modern day social contract. He establishes the administrative state, this nanny state or welfare state, later through FDR too. Because like I mentioned, he is key in FDR's brain trust and really finishing all of this progressive social reform that he'd begun under Wilson. It was interrupted by a couple different presidents that weren't manipulatable, or they weren't on the same agenda as these progressives. So once FDR came in, because FDR was working with Lippmann directly in the Navy in 1916, 1917, they were all friends when they were boys. And FDR calls Brandeis Isaiah. He nicknamed him Isaiah. Again, like this revered, sort of omniscient knowledge that Brandeis holds over everybody. So again, from the Protocol of Peace Commission papers, the committee papers that I went into. Science of management is nothing more than an organized effort pursued intensively to eliminate waste. I can refer you back to the George Bernard Shaw video above about extraordinary number of people whom I'd like to kill. It's about eliminating waste ethically, much like our vaccine programs today. It is absolutely essential that unions be represented in the process. In the next place, the first bears, of course, upon the adopting of what is the standard. But the next thing comes in applying some matter, some incentive, as you may call it, or a reward of a fair division of the profits resulting from the introduction of the new system. Now, what is fair? What is the amount which ought to go to labor is a subject which cannot be determined by any scientific investigation. Whoa. So science can solve every problem except for determining how much of a share labor the worker should get in the creation of whatever it is that he's creating. And this is typical. I mean, we see this today. The wages of a manufacturing worker isn't any different than it was back then. Right? Labor is the most costly aspect to building anything for a manufacturing owner, and they want nothing to do with man and labor. They would rather remove them. This is why you have assembly lines and factories with machines that build stuff, because that's, as soon as you got to build, it's just maintenance and management that you have to deal with, not all the major complications that come with being a human or allowing humans to be your labor. This is why we see here now, 100 years later, there's hardly anybody at a till. It's all automated. So there's ways to work against that too, by the way. To make it little less cost effective for these giant box corporations like Walmart or Home Depot to make so much money off of us. There's ways to go through those unattended checkouts. And over time, you could start to make Home Depot and these big boxes wonder if it's all that cost effective, if you know what I'm saying. But I prefer the lesser aggressive way of always going through a human and trying never to go to Walmart. As a builder here, it's kind of tough not to go to Home Depot, but Walmart, man, we can go a lot of different places before we go there. So it is a matter for the exercise of judgment as to what not only shall be the best and proper incentive, but judgment as to what is just, what is consistent with the interests of the community, all of the conditions which surround introduction, and all of the conditions which concern the pursuit of business under these new conditions. just as those concern the conduct of business under the old conditions, demand that labor should have its representatives in the solution of these problems. So labor is going to get its representative. It's called the trade union leader. But he's going to agree, as the factory owners do, that labor shouldn't get any more increased share of the profit. Even though we're going to increase profit because everybody's scientifically more efficient, we're still going to pocket most of that profit. We'll give you a couple nickels, is really what it is. So now we see Brandeis talking in the exact same manner as Webb, advocating for trade unionism, expert gilding hands, and summoning George Bernard Shaw as eliminating waste can have more than one meaning in much the same way as ameliorating the poor and needy can. Seems strange that these social science engineers, despite advocating scientific management as a solution for every problem of labor and capital, when faced with solving the question of fair compensation for labor, it becomes all of a sudden a problem that cannot be determined by any scientific investigation. So all of a sudden, all the science in the world couldn't be trusted to find an equitable division of profit as easily as it had, or as readily as it was being used by capital to increase the productivity of the laborer and nearly everything else. No, it would be judgment of some single authority that would determine how much the worker would partake in the profit in labor and leisure, and upon whose judgment were they to rely, if not the workers? Mr. Brandeis, I would like to ask whether in your study of this subject you have placed or fixed any time at which labor should cooperate with the employer as to the settling of a time standard and initiation of a standard. Yes, all the time. This is time motion studies. He wants to imply time motion studies to perfect the laborer's motion, to make it most efficient. It seems to me it should begin at the time when the plans are being made to introduce the system, right? As a base, fundamental part of the Taylor system was to create a time motion standard. So time motion studies invented by one of those founders of the Taylor Society, much like Gantt created the Gantt chart. So if you're a construction worker, you've ever been on a construction site, you know what a Gantt chart is. Total coordination of all workers, subtrades, into a easily delineated, understandable graph. It shows when people are supposed to show up and by when they're supposed to be gone. So some of the advocates of scientific management, Mr. Brandeis, who have appeared here as witnesses before the commission while agreeing to the proposition that it would perhaps be beneficial for labor to cooperate or have a voice in cooperating with the employer in the running of the system, felt that at the introduction there should be no cooperation, that there is so much difficulty in the selection of the system and in the installation of it that the added element of labor would make it impossible. Do you so conceive it? I should say quite the contrary. It seems to me that the elements of difficulty in introduction are largely due to the fact that there is hostility to the introduction, and that if organized labor or the representatives of labor should welcome and cooperate in the introduction, a greater part of these difficulties would be removed. The whole of the work, it seems to me, would be greatly aided by a spirit of helpfulness instead of the reverse. So he's basically saying the laborers need to change their attitude. They need to be okay with being scientifically managed in the introduction of this Taylor system. And he says, it seems to me that the whole spirit of all of this would be greatly aided if the workers were a little more helpful in being subjugated into wage slavery. Right, so Mr. Rosenberg, the agreement says explicitly there shall be no strikes and lockout, and possibly during that time we had a few misunderstandings with shops, which did not call strikes but a stoppage of work. But those stoppages of work have never been ordered by the union or by any official of the union. Those stoppages of work have always been ended by the union as far as my knowledge goes. Rosenberg, one of these key witnesses to support the idea of scientific management and subjugation of labor. So to my memory, we had only serious stoppages of work where the union had all sorts of trouble before sending the people back to work. In possibly half a dozen shops, those stoppages in half a dozen shops lasted for a day or possibly 2 days or say a week. Even the independent shops, with those shops we do not have any individual agreement with, we have very few strikes because the union as well as the employers are always trying to get together on some basis to prevent strikes. In other words, as far as strikes are concerned, I believe for the last 3 years and a half, they have been out of existence. This is before the Ludlow massacre. And we're seeing there that the official of the union is siding with the manufacturers, right? So this is a three-person little deal being made, but two of them are privy to information that the other one isn't, the laborer. Labor is left out in the cold. So what has, the chairman asks, Mr. Rosenberg, what has been the result of your adjustment of grievances under this protocol? Since they've brought in the protocol, what positive changes have you seen? We will come to that. For the first couple of months, I mean, he's directing even the chairman's questions. He's just saying, we'll come to that. But first, I want to delve into this. For the first couple of months, we had no machinery, and we did not know how to set about it. The protocol provided for a board of grievances. The board of grievances was composed of 5 representatives of the union and 5 representatives of the Manufacturers Association. Those 10 people used to come together whenever there was any grievance, and we tried to adjust them in the best way we knew how and with the best machinery we had at our disposal. On many occasions, when it was necessary to make an investigation, the Board of Grievances used to employ 1 representative of the employers and 1 representative of the union. This is how collective bargaining works. This is how the 1919 Paris Peace Conference worked. Many countries were invited to offer their opinion, but only the big 4. In the end, only America and Britain, and then really ultimately America, Woodrow Wilson, were the ones calling the shots there. So it's the same. It's the whittling down of different opinions. Whoever's creating trouble, remove the dissenters, get it down to just 1 or 2 or 3 people. And those 2 used to go up to the shop and investigate. And if they could adjust, they did adjust it. And if they could not, they brought it to the grievance board, to the board of the grievance committee. And the grievance board acted on the merits of the case, and some decision was made somewhere. But that arrangement was not satisfactory. The Board of Grievances offhand could not handle so many cases as they had on hand. There was a lot of grievances. So there was a whole lot of friction and trouble in the shops. And we finally called upon the Board of Arbitration to devise ways and means how to adjust grievances in the future quicker than they had been doing. And the Board of Arbitration got together. So you can see they're managing and trying to force a square peg into a round hole. And they're doing it, and they did it. But who here is happy going to work Monday morning? Only if you really have meaning and purpose in your life. Most likely if you're an entrepreneur and in control of your own business. But if you've got a job just over broke, Sunday nights are filled with anxiety and Monday mornings with depression, right? We all know it. Rarely do we speak about it. Thank God it's Friday, buddy, right? TGIF. Oh, it's hump day. Wednesday, we're halfway through this nightmare. And what do we do on the weekends largely but do whatever we can to forget about the last 5 days? Either by inhaling alcohol to speed it up or to just do things that have nothing to do with your job. So that's an escape. You want to try to create a life that you don't need to escape from. But we need to escape from this systematized wage slavery. So he gets into further detail. I don't have to bog the whole thing down with it. You're more than welcome to go and read more, because the protocol of peace here now, we get into some actual documents. Did I include them? No, we do have those. And they were here at one point. So Louis Brandeis says it was the purpose of the protocol to introduce into the relations of the employer and the employee a whole new element. That is the element of industrial democracy. Greenwald, industrial democracy provides an important lens through which to view IR, industrial relations, during the progressive era. Industrial democracy was one of the handful of ideas that defined progressive era reformers. It signaled a new scientific approach to labor in America, as well as a fundamental recommitment to democratic principles. Brandeis was the foremost among all in the creation of the Protocol of Peace, and it was largely through his efforts the strike was ended on September 2nd, 1910. Protocol provided legislation for a 50-hour, 6-day work week, 10 paid legal holidays like slave driver much. We're normally a 5-day-a-week, 40-hour today. And I think we might have more than just 10 paid legal holidays. I think we got one a month, don't we? 12. And time and a half for overtime. An increase in the minimum wage, a regular and prompt cash payday, all in shop subcontracting abolished, all in shop subcontracting abolished. But most importantly, the agreement was the official acceptance of the union shop. It's the introduction, the imposition of the union in America. Many people still have total faith in the union without knowing any of this history. The protocol stipulated, quote, each member of the manufacturers is to maintain a union shop, end quote. And when hiring, quote, union men are preferred, end quote. That is the meaning behind preferred shop. And health care only for union men. The union as the scientific expert, an absolute necessity for the future international system. They would begin constructing a mere 2 years later under Woodrow Wilson, the alignment, first of America, to be compatible to the future international model, a must. But that story concludes this series, so much more on that later. So I want to actually finish that thought. I think I did mention a little bit about it, that the idea of wanting to go to war started much earlier. And it was specifically for, as far as I can tell, a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And this establishment of the union shop, this establishment of a system of efficiency is all geared in preparation for American involvement in the war. So much like the 4-Minute Men and all of these propagandists like Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann himself are spreading pro-war policies and ideas through their own roles, through newspaper print, through literature, through intellectual property. These guys are establishing the labor aspect. So they've got a system of labor and efficiency. Military preparedness is going to involve necessarily a system of factories building bullets and bombs. Now, nobody was doing that prior to this. America was non-interventionist. They were pacifists. So they commandeered all of these factories and forced them to stop creating whatever they were building and start building war material, tanks, ships, right? This is now why they go off into the hills and try to find all the silver and gold, non-ferrous, ferrous metals that they can. And this is where the War Industries Board fires up. Who's the head of it? But Bernard Baruch, fellow Phi Beta Kappa. But before they could go to war, they needed to have a domestic factory system of patriots that were willing to build these bombs and guns. And so at the same time, these 4-Minute Men are advertising through movie screens and all of these things, the promotion of intervention, American intervention into the World War. This is 4 months after Wilson wins his second term on the premise that he kept us out of war. So you can see a total turnabout. This about face that Woodrow Wilson does, 1916. Many historians question it, but you can very clearly see why that's happening in 1916, just as in 1912, he does an about face. Historians are baffled how Wilson won on keeping America out of war, and then less than 4 months later, he declares war. Well, it's the influence of these progressive, Frankist, Jewish radicals, socialists. They're all around Wilson. But Louis Brandeis is the most trusted. So Brandeis named chairman of the arbitration board to enforce the protocol, Brandeis holding the tiebreaker. So from the New York Times, September 3rd, 1910, cloak strike ends, agreement signed, men win all their demands except that for the closed shop. The strike of 70,000 cloak makers, which began early in last July, ended yesterday with the acceptance by both the strikers and the employers of a peace protocol based principally upon the agreement suggested by Louis D. Brandeis of Boston in the last days of July when he conducted a series of conferences between employers and strikers. So he's conducting the meetings and the conferences to get them together to talk, to try to iron out all of the difficulties and put this square peg into the round hole, and he's successful. So also from New York Times, July 3rd, this time, 1915, Shift Committee stops labor war. Cloak manufacturers agree to its proposal to arbitrate differences with union. Settlement now in sight. 50,000 workers were ready to strike. Brandeis or Mayor Mitchell may head the board. So that's 5 years later. This is now after the Ludlow massacre. Brandeis is still very much at the spear, the head of the spear. So from Triangle Shirtwaist, page 14, in New York City's garment industry, reformers found what was arguably the nation's most primitive industry: cutthroat competition, layers of subcontracting, and a poorly paid mass of immigrant workers, among other things, locked garment manufacturing in a 19th century production model. It therefore offered a perfect laboratory for people such as Louis Brandeis. The ladies' garment industry had an established but weak new union. It had a core of willing industrial Democrats within the industry led by Julius Henry Cohen, a noted corporate lawyer. The result, Brandeis's creation, the Protocol of Peace, was one of the most significant labor management cooperation schemes of the pre-New Deal era. So impressive was the protocol that when the Wilson administration created the U.S. Commission on Industrial Relations in 1913, Brandeis was the president's first choice to chair it. This is the investigation into industrial relations that turns into the Peugeot Committee or the Walsh Commission, these famous commissions that turn up a bunch of evidence, incriminating evidence, but get silenced and quashed, like the Reese Committee investigations. So New York also was the site of the terrible Triangle factory fire of March 25th, 1911, when 146 mainly young immigrant women garment workers died. The fire sparked a reform effort that in 4 years remade New York into the model of a progressive state. End quote. Period. Gavel slammed. Right? Not just me saying this, I've got more and more and more of this too. I haven't even got into Brandeis's official biography. Really. So, Mr. Thompson, Mr. Brandeis, some of the representatives of organized labor who have appeared here to testify have concurred in the idea of scientific management, which you have elaborated. That is to say, if by studies and by analysis and selection, better methods for doing the work could be brought about, which would be beneficial to the community and to the worker as well as to the employer, it was a good thing. But they have objected to the stopwatch method of making time studies. People who have represented systems, such as Mr. Taylor and others, have said that the stopwatch method of making time studies is one of the first laws of scientific management. In your opinion, what reasonable objection can there be to the introduction of the stopwatch method of making time studies? Mr. Brandeis states, it seems to me there could be no objection except the one as to the way in which it is introduced. This is where Grosvenor Valentine introduces it more in the benefit of the worker. And it's this sly little lie that they purport that finally pushes that square peg through the round hole. But if it is done in the right way, the stopwatch cannot, it seems to me, be objected to by labor because it is the greatest possible protection to labor. What labor has suffered from in the past and is consistently suffering from now is the ignoring of facts. There is nothing, as I view it, in the situation, the whole social industrial structure that labor wants so much as knowledge. It wants not only to know itself, but it wants others to know it. And any means that may be adopted, whether it be the stopwatch or the photograph or any other means that could absolutely establish the fact as to what is being done, how long it takes to do it, what the unit is of doing the particular thing, all those are in the interest of labor because they are in the interest of truth. So as we finalize this, Brandeis Part 5, Industrial Democracy and the Protocol of Peace, Mr. Thompson asked Brandeis if they've considered ways and means. This is important. Ways and means leads to the ends. So in other words, have you considered the kind of machinery that might be used in the cooperation of the employer and employee in putting into operation their joint cooperation in the introduction of this system? Not machinery, Brandeis says, and I doubt very much whether there is any machinery except a tactful and sympathetic man, someone who realizes in the first place that the greatest gain we are to get from scientific management is advancing the interests of the working man. And who, recognizing that as a fact, has the track to bring the working man and his employer together in the adoption of the means by which the various steps should be taken. So he's asking the worker to just get in line, accept scientific management, and be responsible, sympathetic, and tactful. Mr. Thompson, have you considered whether or not it is feasible at the beginning for a representative of the workers and the firm to have a joint voice in the selection of the expert who shall install a system, or would that be impractical? Mr. Brandeis, certainly. In such a selection, Mr. Brandeis, of the kind of man you mentioned, a tactful diplomatic man, he would then be, in a sense, the instrument of or medium by which this principle of cooperation in scientific management might be brought about. Certainly, Brandeis says. So, man as the tool, as the instrument to bring scientific management about. So many generations ago, established this idea. So the following conversation between the chairman, Frank Walsh, this is the guy that ends up being the head of the Walsh Commission, and Mr. A. Rosenberg, another witness, or a further testimony from an already mentioned witness. Walsh asking Rosenberg, how has the protocol of peace affected the shop's work? The father of the protocol of peace, oh, you know what? I messed up there. We've already gone through this. He talks about the many ways that protocols worked, yet says that, we're not sure as to how we're going to determine how much profit the laborer gets to share it. Everything else is settled. We're just not sure how we're going to do that. So the father of the protocol, Louis Brandeis, came to the labor question in 1892. It was then that the young MIT law professor, fresh from Harvard Law School, was transformed by the violence of the Homestead strike at the Carnegie Steelworks in Pennsylvania. It was the affair at Homestead, Brandeis later recalled, which first set me to thinking seriously about the labor problem. It took the shock of battle to turn my mind definitely toward a searching study of the relations of labor to industry. In 1910, while New York was in the heat of the second in a series of general strikes in the garment industry, Brandeis came to the city to bring labor and management together in a novel agreement that became known as the Protocol of Peace. And he was brought there by another Jewish labor leader, Fabian, because they were stuck. They didn't know how to figure this out. They were at odds. Labor and capital were not getting together, despite all the greatest efforts of all of these intelligent men. So Fabian thinks of Brandeis, says, if Brandeis can't figure it out, nobody can. So they decided that if a big man made a call for a settlement conference, and if the union and Cohen could set certain preconditions, talks could begin. It was clear to all concerned that they meant a big Jewish man. Both sides were concerned that their matters be settled within their community. They did not want an outsider meddling in their affairs. In a July 21st letter to Louis Brandeis, Bloomfield explained how he laid the foundations for the talk. See, it's labor, it's Jewish laborers, it's Jewish factory owners, and now Jewish lawyers. They didn't want anybody outside their community. There was only one open door to take a big man like Brandeis and empower him, to confer with both sides and draw up a fair basis of negotiations. Both responded heartily and suggested that I invite Mr. B and come with him for a private talk. That initial meeting set in motion a process that eventually led to the protocol. On July 22nd, Brandeis left for New York, taking with him a draft of a proposed labor agreement. After a preliminary meeting between the principal negotiators, Meyer London, noted socialist lawyer who advised the union, and Cohen, a later conference was scheduled with Brandeis as chair. At this first meeting were 10 representatives from each side plus Brandeis and his staff. We're talking about was what we've already discussed. Uh, at first, there was 10 from each side, and it was whittled down to 3. In writing about this meeting, McClure's Magazine's Edith Wyatt was struck by similarities on both sides. Both groups were almost identical. They were overwhelmingly Jewish. The union delegation included middle-aged unionist radical workers, East Side intellectuals, and socialists. They were all Jewish. And so did the management group. The mood at that first meeting was hopeful, according to McClure's. Samuel Gompers, president of the American Federation of Labor, who was an observer at the first meeting, was so confident that he returned to Washington on the 29th, telling the New York Times he was sure that the garment workers' strike would be settled speedily. Brandeis set the mood for the conference. He told the 20 men assembled that they were witnessing an important moment in history, the birth of a new system of industrial relations. Gentlemen, Brandeis stated, we have come together in a matter which we must all recognize as very serious and an important business, not only to settle this strike, but to create a relation which will prevent similar strikes in the future. That work is one which, it seems to me, is approached in a spirit which makes the situation a very hopeful one. And I am sure from my conferences with the council of both parties and with the individual members whom they represent, that those who are here are all here with that desire. It seems to me that aid could be effectively and properly given by providing that the manufacturers should, in the employment of labor hereafter, give the preference to union men, where the union men are equal in efficiency to any non-union applicants. Brandeis' opening remarks, and that is from one of his official biographers, Mason. And that book is here, but it fell in the back. That's a first edition that I got, and that's like 1940s dust in the book. And strangely, I got a real bad sinus infection after reading that book. In summary, we see Brandeis advocating the setting of time standards, employing Robert Grosvenor Valentine's groundbreaking approach to industrial relations and camouflaging their true intentions in the subtlety of their delivery or how it was presented to the worker. Valentine saying it far easier to persuade the worker when speaking of the advantages due him, not the advantages to be enjoyed by the manufacturer. Brandeis sounding very much like Mr. Jones, the middle manager persuading the slaves back to the plantation, advocating on moral grounds the advantages the laborer has in not only knowing himself, but using time study standards as a protection. Brandeis then blaming the difficulty in establishing a slave labor system on hostility from labor itself, blaming the worker for not having a spirit of cooperation and helpfulness and embracing their new servitude. You know, Aldous Huxley, 40 years later, said that people will learn to love their servitude. But at first they did not, did they? Go look into the labor wars. Many shots fired, many deaths. This is why there was bombs being dropped at J.P. Morgan's House of Morgan on the corner, famously. You know, much like what the Unabomber did in the 90s was happening at this time. And what does the Unabomber talk about? With the threat of insatiable progress, technical advancement without any consideration of human safety or concerns at all. I'm not saying I advocate for what he did or advocate for what they did back then. I'm just stating I'm a forensic historian and I'm transferring information. So note also how the representatives are chosen for either side in this new system. One for the manufacturer, one for the union, nothing for the laborer. Despite the entire concept of industrial democracy being based on cooperation, we see their idea of cooperation involves submission of one party by the other two. This slight altering of perspective, all the toehold the progressive vampires needed. Much like you have to invite a vampire in, right? Brandeis, while holding the ultimate authority, had become the entering wedge experts of a national arbitration board. And manufacturers' relationship with the union, built on a common interest in scientific management, now allows the exploitation of the laborer. And if there was any doubt, that is exactly what we've seen play out over the 20th century. Labor was to have no say early in its implementation or institution, whatever the word that they used, introduction, Labor was to have no early in its introduction, and it appears he isn't getting one late. Yeah, somebody working at a factory isn't making any more than they did back then, percentage wise, and when you take into account taxes and everything else, probably less. In the time since, wages, or more importantly, the buying power of the working class. This is the important part, the buying power. Talk about percentages. Well, what's your buying power today in comparison to the laborer's buying power back then? And what was your buying power before you got thrown into a factory and you were creating something for yourself and selling and sharing in the entire profit of whatever it was that you labored for? And leisure time, one of the things that they mentioned and had thrown out there as a carrot. Still, we're at a 5 day a week. Many people work 6 days a week. Many people work 7 days a week. Many people work 2 jobs just to make the ends meet. So leisure time and the buying power both have diminished significantly or remained stagnant when an increase of both was promised through scientific management. Well, manufacturers and big boxes break record profits nearly yearly. Today, decent people from decent backgrounds now need more than one job to make ends meet, despite several more major advances in productivity throughout the century. The working class is far worse off than they. Sorry, getting tired. We're late in this. I'll read that whole thing again. Today, decent people from decent backgrounds now need more than one job to make ends meet, and despite several more major advances in productivity throughout the century, the working class is far worse off now than then. So for over 100 years, the labor union leader has existed, a tactful diplomatic man, an instrument or medium by which this principle of cooperation in scientific management might be brought about. With the application of scientific management, labor relations, trade unionism, collective bargaining, the union leader, and the standardizing of the factory floor, or the democratizing of the factory floor. Brandeis wasn't establishing his industrial democracy to liberate the American worker from his dreadful human condition. Brandeis was very clearly authoring the blueprint for a new progressive national policy of industry centered on war production. The women's garments strikes of 1910-11 resulted in nationwide regulatory changes in labor relations, while Brandeis's other cases standardized interstate commerce, regulated competition, and streamlined the railroad. With Part 5 now in the rearview mirror, it sure looks as though Brandeis was laying the necessary groundwork for an efficient and patriotic American workforce to build war machines, artillery, and material for a coming war some 4 years before British entry and 6 years before American involvement. In any event, Louis D. Brandeis' scope of work now getting larger in several surprising ways, and maybe the reader now is beginning to see why we say Louis D. Brandeis is the maker of our modern day social contract. Okay. So there you go. And how much ever time has elapsed. We've gone through the introduction of socialism into America, how the socialist Marxists all integrated into American culture through the Association of American Universities like Columbia, Yale, Harvard. They established this idea of scientific governance of society through things like scientific management, preferred shop, unionism, and created the framework or the groundwork for everything that came after. I hope you got a lot out of it, because I sure did when I investigated it. This scientific management and the creation of industrial democracy, this really, out of this came the realization that these guys were creating our modern day social contract. So now you're talking much larger concepts and context in which we need to take this progressive era, because it builds out, it's a smaller subtitle to this larger myth of human progress that comes out of enlightenment. Okay. Later we'll get into Brandeis's affiliations, associations with President Abraham Lincoln, and how manifest destiny and progressivism and all of that goes back through Lincoln. And same with Zionism. This is, Louis Brandeis, as we covered in part 3, changes his middle name to Dembitz in honor of his Zionist uncle, who was a part of the Lincoln administration. Okay. So for all of those that have stuck around, you should have a greater perspective on your environment, your surroundings, and where you are. So I congratulate you, first of all, for being still here. Yay, good job. Even if you have to break it into 3 or 4 or 5 visits with me, man, it's important it's important for you to know that you're not going to get a more concise telling of the history than here. I've been looking now for 15 years, going on 20, and very few people ever mention Brandeis. Okay, so everybody's familiar with the creature from Jekyll Island. G. Edward Griffin, who's apparently a friend of mine on Facebook from 2 different Facebook profiles. He wrote this book. And so I'm calling you out, G. Edward Griffin, because in The Creature from Jekyll Island, he doesn't mention Brandeis once. There's no Brandeis. Nearly 600 pages. No Brandeis. See that? So, gatekeeper, busting through gates, right? That's what we do now with the history of propaganda. And I'll leave you with this thought as I pulled this dollar bill out of the book. That's as far as I could read that Creature of Jekyll Island, and I could sense that it was all bullshit. Louis Brandeis is there at the introduction of the dollar bill, the famous Ordo Ab Chao. He's there, right, looking over FDR's shoulder when that's created. Now, how involved would the true architect of the Federal Reserve be in the creation of that dollar bill? It'd be crazy to think that he wasn't. So that is some investigation that we're going to go into in the future. Brandeis's involvement in the creation of that dollar bill with the pyramid and the all-seeing eye on it, because we've traced Brandeis back to the region that the Illuminati was created. Brandeis a Frankist, Jakob Frank apparently a founder of the Illuminati. All of these men, Phi Beta Kappa. And so I think we'll end it there. I appreciate anybody that's been watching. You can support our show, as mentioned earlier, at the History of Propaganda. Definitely subscribe and share this information as much as possible, because we are the true gatekeepers, and we are showing you exactly what is being kept from you, the progressive era. Cheers, y'all. Talk to you later.